What if you were the smartest person in the world, but the world never noticed? What if your genius was your curse? David sat in his small, cluttered apartment, surrounded by piles of paper and half-built contraptions. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, a series of numbers and formulas flashing across the screen in front of him. To anyone else, it would have looked like chaos, but to David, it was perfect. It made sense. The world outside didn't understand it, but to him, this was where he belonged. It was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that fills every corner of your mind with thoughts that have no escape. His mother had passed away 3 months ago, and since then, the silence in his life had only deepened. She had been his anchor, his guiding star in a world that didn't quite know how to handle his brilliance. She was gone now, and so was the only person who truly understood him. The world outside David's apartment was loud, bustling with noise he couldn't quite comprehend. He didn't understand why people made small talk or why they felt the need to be so polite. He never knew how to respond, and it made him anxious, frustrated. The truth was, David felt like an outsider in a world that demanded conformity, and the more he tried to fit in, the more it became clear that he never would. But that didn't matter. Not really. He had his work, his inventions, his mind, and yet, his mother's death had left a void he couldn't fill with algorithms or equations. He could build rockets in his sleep, but he couldn't fix the loneliness that gnawed at him every day. His father, who had never understood him, hadn't even called after the funeral. David had long since stopped hoping for connection from him. And so, here he was alone, in his apartment, the weight of his own thoughts pressing down on him like 1,000 pounds. The light from the computer screen flickered in the darkness, casting long shadows on the walls. The hum of a car passing by broke the silence. It was fleeting, but it reminded David of the world beyond. A world where people had families, friends, and careers. And David had none of those things. Not really. A notification pinged on his computer, breaking his trance. It was an email, one he didn't recognize. Dear David, I hope this message finds you well. I'm Elon Musk. I've seen your work, and I think you might be exactly what we need at Tesla. If you're interested, I'd like to discuss an opportunity with you. David blinked. His heart skipped a beat. Elon Musk? The name seemed almost too surreal to be real. He stared at the message for a long time, unsure of what to make of it. Was it some kind of prank? Could someone like Elon Musk, the founder of Tesla, be interested in someone like him? His fingers trembled as he clicked the reply button. Mr. Musk, I'm honored by your message. I would be very interested in discussing the opportunity further. David leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. For the first time in months, a flicker of hope ignited inside him. Maybe, just maybe, this was his chance to prove himself, to show the world, not just the tiny corner of it he lived in, that his genius meant something. But a part of him was still skeptical. People didn't just reach out to someone like him, did they? David closed his eyes for a moment and tried to silence the doubts swirling in his mind. This could be the beginning of something big, something that could change everything. But only if he was brave enough to take the first step. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? David had never been good at talking to people. It wasn't that he didn't want to, but there was always a gap between what he thought and what he could say. His mind raced at lightning speed, but his words seemed to lag behind, stumbling over themselves as they made their way out of his mouth. Conversations were an exhausting puzzle that he could never quite piece together. When he was younger, his mother used to sit beside him as he struggled to form coherent sentences. She'd patiently help him, translating his thoughts into words, guiding him through the social maze that he could never navigate alone. It's okay, David, she'd say softly, her voice a comforting balm. Take your time. You don't have to rush. But now, in the quiet of his apartment, there was no one to help him find the right words. No one to reassure him that it was okay to be different. His mother's voice was just a memory, one that echoed through the empty rooms of the house, growing fainter with each passing day. It wasn't just his ability to speak that was the problem. It was the way his mind worked, too fast, too chaotic for the world around him to understand. When he was a child, his teachers would often tell his mother that he was too much. He absorbed information at an extraordinary rate, but when it came to social cues, the subtleties of human interaction, he was always a step behind. His classmates had their own worlds, worlds of friends, shared interests, and late-night sleepovers, but David never quite understood the appeal. He preferred the quiet hum of a computer or the rhythm of solving complex equations. That was his refuge, his escape. It was in those quiet moments that he could hear the voice of his genius, clear, sharp, and unwavering. His mind worked like a finely tuned machine, churning out ideas faster than he could ever possibly implement them. He was a creator, a thinker, a visionary. But in the eyes of the world, he was just an awkward, misunderstood young man who never quite fit in. David's mother had always told him that his brilliance was both a gift and a curse. She would take his hand in hers, looking into his eyes with deep compassion, and tell him that his unique perspective on the world was something to be cherished. She'd always believed in him, even when he couldn't see it himself. "You'll do amazing things, David. Just give it time. The world will catch up to you." But now, with her gone, it felt as though the world would never catch up to him. The loneliness was suffocating, and the weight of his own expectations pressed heavily on his chest. Every day was a battle between his desire to create and the crushing isolation he felt from those around him. He wasn't sure which was worse, the silence or the yearning for connection that he couldn't satisfy. It had been weeks since his mother's passing, and David still hadn't touched her things. Her books, her clothes, the small trinkets she collected over the years. Everything was just as she left it. He couldn't bring himself to pack them away, couldn't bear the thought of parting with any piece of her. So, they remained, scattered across the apartment like pieces of a puzzle he couldn't put together. Each item was a reminder of the one person who truly understood him, the person who had always known how to help him find his way in the world. When the email from Elon Musk had appeared in his inbox, David had been unsure how to react. It was a moment of disbelief, followed by a surge of cautious hope. Could it really be him? The Elon Musk? The billionaire inventor who had built companies like SpaceX and Tesla? The man who had become a symbol of innovation and bold ideas? David had always admired Musk from afar. He'd read every article, watched every interview. He admired Musk's ability to take risks, to push boundaries, and to think in ways that most people couldn't even fathom. But the idea that Musk would see something in him, someone so ordinary in the eyes of the world, seemed impossible. Still, there was a flicker of possibility, a spark that refused to be extinguished. After staring at the email for what felt like hours, David finally made his decision. He clicked send and responded to Musk's message. It was simple, just a brief acknowledgement of the opportunity, but it felt monumental. For the first time in months, David felt like something bigger than himself was within reach. The days that followed were filled with a whirlwind of emotions. David found himself questioning everything: his abilities, his worth, his place in the world. But at the same time, there was a sense of excitement, a feeling of anticipation that he hadn't experienced in a long time. This could be his chance to prove himself, to show the world that he was more than just an isolated genius in a small apartment. And yet, as he thought about the upcoming opportunity with Musk, doubt began to creep in. What if he wasn't enough? What if his awkwardness, his inability to communicate effectively, would get in the way? What if he failed? It was a familiar fear, one that had plagued him since childhood. He had always been told that his potential was limitless, that he had the ability to change the world. But the pressure to live up to that potential had always felt suffocating. The expectations, his own, and the ones placed on him by others, were too great. David had spent years building up his self-worth through his intellect, through his ideas. But deep down, he knew that no amount of genius could replace the need for human connection. He couldn't build a life of meaning on inventions alone. He needed something more. He needed to find a way to bridge the gap between his mind and the world outside. The phone rang, jolting him from his thoughts. It was an unfamiliar number. His heart skipped a beat. He took a deep breath before answering. "Hello, David," came the voice on the other end. It was Elon Musk. David's heart raced as he listened to Elon Musk's voice on the other end of the line. The sheer surrealism of it all made his mind feel foggy, and for a moment, he was unsure if he was dreaming. David, it's Elon Musk. I'm really glad you're interested in the opportunity at Tesla. We've been following your work for some time, and I think you have something truly unique to offer. David took a deep breath. It was real. This was happening. He had to focus. I'm honored, Mr. Musk. I'm not sure what I can offer, but I'd be happy to discuss any ideas you have. David's voice cracked slightly, and he winced. His social anxiety, the thing that often held him back from expressing himself, was rearing its head again. It was a constant battle inside his head. His mind was clear and filled with brilliant thoughts, but his words always felt out of reach. Elon seemed to pick up on David's hesitation. There was a pause on the line before he spoke again, his tone warm and reassuring. Don't worry, David. We don't need you to be perfect. We need you to think outside the box, to push boundaries. Tesla is all about innovation, and we believe you could bring something new to the table. We're working on a project to improve energy efficiency in our solar panels, and we think your ideas could make a huge difference. David's mind was already racing. Solar panels, energy efficiency. The things he could do with the right technology were endless. His fingers itched to start sketching designs, calculating numbers, building prototypes. This was exactly what he needed. An opportunity to work on something that aligned with his passion for technology and his desire to make a real-world impact. I think I could help. I've been working on some algorithms that might improve solar energy storage, David blurted out. His excitement overtook his anxiety, and for once, his words flowed more easily. That's great to hear, Elon said, clearly intrigued. How about this? I'll have my team set up a video call for next week. We can go over the project details, and we'll see where we can go from there. I think you're exactly what we've been looking for. David could hardly believe it. This was it, the chance he had been waiting for. He quickly scribbled down the details on a piece of paper, trying to calm his racing thoughts. Elon Musk, the person whose vision he had admired from afar, was inviting him to contribute to one of his company's biggest projects. As soon as the call ended, David leaned back in his chair, his heart still pounding in his chest. He felt a mixture of exhilaration and fear, the kind that always accompanied a new venture. This was more than just a job opportunity. It was a chance to prove that he wasn't just a misfit, that his unique way of thinking could actually make a difference in the world. But as the excitement started to fade, a familiar fear crept in. David had spent most of his life in isolation, his genius overshadowed by his inability to communicate and connect with others. Now, he would have to work with a team, collaborate, interact, express his ideas clearly. The thought sent a shiver down his spine. He had always felt like an outsider, someone who didn't belong in the circles that mattered. And even though this was an incredible opportunity, the idea of working alongside brilliant, accomplished people felt like an insurmountable challenge. What if they didn't understand him? What if his ideas didn't make sense to them? What if they thought he was too strange or awkward to fit in? David rubbed his temples, trying to steady himself. This was his chance, and he couldn't afford to let fear take over. He had always been good at solving problems, at thinking through complex issues. But this was a different kind of problem. This was about navigating relationships, managing expectations, and communicating in a way that went beyond equations and blueprints. It was about finding his place in a world that had always felt just out of reach. That night, he hardly slept. His mind raced through the possibilities, running through scenarios and strategies. He pulled out his notebook, scribbling ideas for energy efficiency models, possible algorithms to test, and thoughts on how he might present his ideas in a way that wouldn't be lost in translation. As he worked, he found himself becoming more and more engrossed in the task at hand. The anxiety was still there, lurking in the background, but the work gave him a sense of purpose, of control. By the time morning came, David had barely slept, but he had a plan. He was ready to take on whatever challenge Elon Musk and Tesla could throw at him. 2 days later, David found himself sitting in front of his laptop, nervously adjusting his tie in the mirror. This was it, the video call with Tesla. His heart beat erratically in his chest as he waited for the call to connect. When the screen flickered to life, David was met with a view of Elon Musk's face, calm and focused. Behind him, David could make out the sleek, modern design of Tesla's headquarters. "David, great to meet you," Elon said, smiling warmly. David nodded, trying his best to mask his nervousness. "It's an honor to be here, Mr. Musk." "Please, call me Elon," Musk replied, his tone friendly. "I know you've got some ideas to share. We're all ears." David took a deep breath and launched into his presentation. He talked about the algorithms he had developed, his thoughts on improving solar energy storage, and how he believed his work could help Tesla meet its goals. His words came faster now, more confidently than they had in the past. He was talking about something he understood deeply, something that sparked his passion. But as he looked at the faces of the team members listening intently on the call, doubt crept in. What if they didn't get it? What if his ideas were too complex, too far outside the norm? What if they laughed him off? There was a long silence after he finished speaking. David's stomach churned. But then Elon spoke again, his voice steady. "I have to say, David, we're impressed. This is exactly the kind of thinking we need at Tesla. I think we can take this to the next level together." David's heart soared, and for the first time in a long time, he felt a spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to be alone in his brilliance. Maybe there was a place for him in the world after all. David sat at his desk in the days following the video call with Elon Musk, his mind buzzing with a mixture of excitement and fear. The confirmation that Tesla was genuinely interested in his ideas was a dream come true, but as he dug deeper into the work ahead of him, the pressure seemed to mount with every passing hour. He had been given an opportunity of a lifetime, but what if he couldn't live up to it? He had spent most of his life in the confines of his own mind, creating ideas and inventions that no one else could understand. But now, he was expected to collaborate with brilliant, experienced engineers, scientists, and innovators. He wasn't just another isolated genius anymore. He was part of something bigger. That thought should have thrilled him, but instead, it brought a flood of anxiety. He walked to the small kitchen in his apartment, trying to clear his mind. The world outside was as chaotic as ever, cars honking, people rushing about. But to David, the noise felt like a distant hum, barely registering over the whir of his thoughts. The email he had received the day after the video call had given him clear instructions for his next steps. Tesla's team was eager to begin collaborating on the solar energy storage project, and David was expected to present his initial findings in just a week's time. It was a lot to digest, but David was determined to prove himself. He couldn't let this chance slip away. This was his shot to show the world, and himself, that he was capable of more than just equations and algorithms on a page. But doubt gnawed at him relentlessly. What if he couldn't communicate his ideas well enough? What if the team didn't understand the brilliance behind his designs? Or worse, what if they found his way of thinking too unconventional? These thoughts kept him up at night, his mind racing with possibilities and what-ifs. As he sat down at his desk, the weight of it all seemed to press on his chest. He opened his laptop and stared at the blank screen, unsure where to start. There were thousands of numbers, equations, and theories in his head, but how could he possibly make them make sense to a group of people who had no idea what it was like to think the way he did? He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. His brilliance had always felt like a double-edged sword. On one hand, it set him apart and allowed him to create, but on the other, it isolated him from the rest of the world. No one could keep up with his thoughts. No one could match the speed of his ideas. It was a curse that had followed him his whole life, and now, as he faced the greatest opportunity of his career, it threatened to undo him. Just then, his phone buzzed. A message from his childhood friend, Emily, flashed across the screen. They hadn't spoken much in recent years, but Emily had always been the one person who understood him on a deeper level. They had grown up together, both misfits in their own way, finding solace in each other's company. She was the first person who had ever really listened to him without judgment. The friendship had faded over time, but David couldn't help but reach out to her when things started to feel overwhelming. "Hey, David, how's everything going? I heard about Tesla, that's huge. I'm so proud of you. Want to catch up?" David hesitated for a moment before typing a response. He wasn't used to sharing his struggles, but this was different. Emily had always known how to help him untangle his thoughts, to remind him that things weren't as impossible as they seemed. "Hi, Emily. I don't know where to start. It's a lot. I'm not sure I can do this. I don't know if I can fit in with the Tesla team. What if they don't get it? What if I mess up?" There was a pause before Emily replied. "David, I know you. You've always been your own worst critic. But here's the thing. You don't have to do this alone. You're not meant to solve everything by yourself. You've got an amazing opportunity, and I believe in you. Don't forget how much you've already accomplished just by being you." David let out a slow breath as he read her message. For a moment, he allowed himself to feel the weight of her words. He wasn't alone. He didn't have to carry the burden of perfection on his shoulders. Maybe it was okay to be vulnerable, to let others in. Maybe it was okay to not have all the answers. He typed back, a little more hopeful than before. "Thanks, Emily. I really needed to hear that. Anytime. You've got this, David. Now go show the world what you can do." As he set the phone down, David felt a sense of calm wash over him. Emily's words had reminded him of something he had almost forgotten. He didn't have to prove anything to anyone. This was about making a difference, not about impressing people. He had the skills, the knowledge, and the passion. All he had to do was take the first step. With newfound resolve, David turned back to his laptop. He began typing, focusing on the details of his solar energy storage proposal. His fingers moved across the keyboard faster than they ever had before. The numbers and algorithms were flowing with ease, no longer blocked by the walls of self-doubt that had been holding him back. The fear hadn't disappeared entirely, but it had become a distant hum, no longer the loud, insistent voice in his head. David knew this wasn't going to be easy. He knew there would be challenges ahead, moments where the pressure would feel overwhelming. But for the first time, he felt ready. Ready to embrace the discomfort, ready to push through the fear. He had the talent, the vision, and the support of the right people. That was enough. The week flew by in a blur of calculations, sketches, and revisions. David worked tirelessly, not stopping to second-guess himself. Every day felt like a battle, but he was winning it, one step at a time. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he was certain of one thing. He was going to give it everything he had. The day of the presentation arrived, and David found himself once again sitting in front of his laptop, ready for the video call. His palms were clammy, but his mind was clear. This was his moment. As the screen flickered to life, Elon Musk appeared, flanked by several members of Tesla's engineering team. They all greeted him warmly, and David felt a surge of gratitude. These were the people who would help him turn his vision into reality. He wasn't alone in this. "David," Elon said with a smile, "we've been looking forward to hearing your ideas. Let's see what you've got." With a deep breath, David launched into his presentation. As he spoke, he noticed that the nervousness that had plagued him earlier had faded. He was in his element now, talking about what he knew best. The algorithms, the data, the future of solar energy, it was all coming together. And for the first time in a long time, David felt like he belonged. The tension in the air was palpable as David sat before his laptop, the cursor blinking in anticipation. The video call was just minutes away. His heart was pounding so loudly, it almost drowned out the words of encouragement from his mentor, who was off camera. Elon Musk had stepped away for a moment. David took a deep breath, trying to center himself. He had worked tirelessly, hours upon hours, refining his proposal. He had poured his soul into this project, hoping beyond hope that it would make an impact. This was his shot. The screen flickered as Elon Musk reappeared, flanked by several other members of Tesla's leadership team. They greeted him warmly, but David could feel the nervousness creeping in again. They were all brilliant minds, innovators in their own right. And here he was, an outsider, an unproven entity trying to convince them that his vision could be the missing piece to their project. David opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. The weight of the moment pressed down on him like a physical force. His thoughts were clear, but the moment felt overwhelming. What if they didn't understand? What if the ideas he had poured so much energy into fell flat? What if he let them down? What if they rejected him, just like so many others had before? He could feel his pulse in his fingertips as he forced himself to continue. The silence hung between them, and the pressure to say something, anything, became almost unbearable. Then, Elon broke the silence. David, we've been looking at your proposal, and it's truly impressive. Your ideas on improving solar storage could revolutionize our technology. But we need to know, how confident are you that this can work? This is a huge step forward for Tesla. We can't afford to take unnecessary risks. David's mind raced, every single word hitting him with the weight of a challenge he wasn't sure he was ready for. The reality of the situation set in. This wasn't just an opportunity for him to contribute. It was an opportunity to shape the future of a company that was already changing the world. His ideas had to be sound. Every algorithm, every calculation, every theory had to hold up under the microscope. David had always worked alone. He had never been required to answer questions like this from a team of experts. The pressure built up in his chest, and for a brief moment, he froze. He thought back to his mother, the woman who had always believed in him, who had constantly told him that his brilliance was a gift. She had taught him that nothing in life was ever perfect, that every mistake was simply another step toward understanding. She had always believed in the beauty of trying, even when success seemed impossible. But now, standing before this team, David felt his confidence slip through his fingers. His mind, so often quick and sharp, felt sluggish. The numbers swam in front of his eyes. Every calculation, every hypothesis that had seemed so solid just hours ago now seemed like fragile glass, ready to shatter at the first sign of scrutiny. His hands trembled as he reached for the mouse to click through the slides of his proposal. Each number, each graphic, was a manifestation of his life's work, and yet he felt detached from them. This wasn't just a presentation. It was a test, one that could determine the trajectory of his entire career. And worse, it could prove that everything he had worked for, all the countless hours of struggle and isolation, amounted to nothing. David's throat constricted. He couldn't speak, not because he didn't know the answer, but because he didn't know how to explain it to them, how to make them see the brilliance he knew was there, waiting to be unlocked. The fear of failure loomed so large in his mind that it threatened to swallow him whole. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the soft hum of the computer, the faint clicking of keys from the team members who were silently observing him. Elon's eyes never left David's face, his expression unreadable. And then, just as David thought he might crumble under the weight of the silence, Elon broke in again. But this time, his voice was different. It was calm, almost understanding. "David," he said, his tone soft but firm, "you don't have to prove anything to us right now. We all know what it's like to feel the pressure, to face the fear of failure. But what matters is that you're here, that you're sharing your vision with us. And we're listening. That's what matters." David blinked, his mind racing to keep up with Elon's words. I just don't know if this is enough. What if the team doesn't believe in it? What if it doesn't work?" he stammered. His voice cracked, betraying the uncertainty that had been building inside him for weeks. The fear that had kept him up at night was spilling out, unfiltered and raw. Elon smiled, a small but reassuring gesture. "You're not alone in this, David. We've all had moments where we doubted ourselves, but we've learned that it's those moments of uncertainty that push us forward. It's okay to be unsure. It's okay to stumble. What matters is how we pick ourselves up and keep moving." David's breath caught in his throat. The words seemed simple enough, but they carried with them a weight of truth that resonated deep within him. It was okay to be uncertain. It was okay to be vulnerable. For the first time, he realized that failure wasn't the end. It was simply a part of the process. It wasn't the mistakes that defined people. It was their ability to learn from them, to keep pushing forward despite the obstacles. He sat up straighter, wiping his eyes quickly. A sudden warmth filled his chest, and he found the words he had been struggling to express. I believe in these algorithms. I believe that this can work. I've spent years developing this model, and I know it's sound. It's not perfect, but it's the beginning of something that could change the way we think about solar energy. I want to be part of that change. I want to help." There was a pause, and for a moment, David was unsure if they would respond at all. The team seemed to exchange glances, their faces unreadable. But then, slowly, one of the engineers, a woman with short black hair, nodded in approval. I think we can work with this, she said. It's unorthodox, but that's what we need. We need bold ideas to take us further. David felt a rush of relief wash over him. The knot in his stomach began to loosen, the fear receding. He had done it. Not perfectly, not without fear, but he had done it. Elon leaned forward, a glint of excitement in his eyes. David, I think you're going to be a valuable part of this team. Let's take this to the next level. As the meeting wrapped up, David couldn't believe what had just happened. He had faced his fear, he had been vulnerable, and he had stepped into the unknown. And somehow it had worked. For the first time in years, David felt something he hadn't known in a long time. Hope. The future, once shrouded in uncertainty, now seemed full of possibilities. His journey wasn't over. It had only just begun. The following days felt like a blur. The overwhelming weight of the video call with Elon Musk had faded into a sense of accomplishment. David was no longer the nervous, self-doubting young genius he had been when he first sent in his proposal. Now, he was part of something bigger. He was a cog in the great machine that was Tesla, and his ideas were going to help shape the future. He sat at his desk in his small apartment, eyes scanning through the feedback the Tesla team had sent him. His heart raced as he reviewed the modifications they had suggested, the improvements they wanted to implement, and the collaboration that lay ahead. This was real now. The ideas he had developed on his own were being integrated into one of the most forward-thinking companies in the world. But even though he felt a sense of pride, a nagging uncertainty still lingered at the back of his mind. Could he keep up with this pace? Could he continue to meet the high expectations set by Tesla? The team's feedback was constructive, but also humbling. There were parts of his proposal that needed rethinking, aspects that the experts felt could be better optimized. And though the team's encouragement had been genuine, the pressure was mounting. David had always been someone who thrived in isolation, someone who worked in his own world, free from the expectations of others. Now, he had to adjust to the reality of teamwork, of constant feedback, and of the relentless drive of a company that didn't slow down for anyone. A loud knock on his door snapped him out of his thoughts. David glanced at the clock. It was nearly midnight. Who could that be? He opened the door to find his neighbor, Lucy, standing there with a concerned look on her face. She was holding a package in her hands. "Hey, David. I think this is for you," she said, handing him the package. "It came for you this evening, but I was out when the delivery guy dropped it off." David took the package, slightly confused. He didn't recognize the return address, but his curiosity piqued. He thanked Lucy before stepping back into his apartment and closing the door behind him. He placed the package on his desk and stared at it for a few moments. Was it from Tesla? A special delivery from one of the engineers? Or maybe it was just some tech company wanting his expertise on a side project. The packaging was simple, with no logos or branding. Just a plain brown box with his name written in neat handwriting. David carefully tore through the tape and opened it up. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was a small, metal object. He picked it up, his mind racing. It looked like a keychain, but as he turned it over in his hand, he realized it was something more. A miniature model of a solar panel, with tiny LED lights embedded into it. The craftsmanship was impeccable, and it was clear that this was no ordinary souvenir. Attached to the keychain was a small note. "David, sometimes the smallest things have the biggest impact. Remember, you are not just changing technology, you are changing the world. Keep pushing forward. Elon." David blinked, his breath catching in his throat. A gift from Elon Musk? The weight of the words on the note sank in. This wasn't just a message of encouragement. This was a sign. A reminder that what he was doing wasn't just a job, it was a mission. He wasn't just contributing to a project, he was shaping the future of energy. And Elon, the very man who had once seemed like an unreachable figure in the tech world, was standing behind him, rooting for his success. For the first time, David felt truly connected to something larger than himself. This wasn't just about his success, it was about the greater good. It was about making a difference in a world that needed change. The message had lifted something heavy inside of him. The pressure hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed into a motivation that was stronger than ever. David understood now that this was more than just the next step in his career. It was a calling. He smiled to himself as he placed the miniature solar panel on his desk, the tiny lights blinking to life. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. He was exactly where he needed to be. The next morning, David arrived at the Tesla offices for the first time. He had already interacted with the team remotely, but walking into the building felt different. It was massive, sleek, and brimming with energy, just like the company itself. The walls were lined with glass, the sunlight pouring in and reflecting off the polished surfaces. Everything about it screamed innovation. He was greeted by a few members of the team, and after a brief tour of the facility, they led him to a conference room filled with large monitors displaying all sorts of data and graphs. The atmosphere was high energy, but there was an undercurrent of calm professionalism that made it clear everyone in the room was driven by a shared mission: to create something revolutionary. David was introduced to his new colleagues, each one an expert in their field, all eager to dive into his proposal. The first few hours were spent going over the details of his project, discussing what worked and what needed improvement. It was an intense session, with questions flying back and forth, but David found himself engaged and excited. These were the kinds of conversations he had always longed for, the chance to collaborate with like-minded people who shared his vision. However, even amidst the collaborative energy, David couldn't shake the feeling that he still had much to prove. Everyone around him seemed so confident, so sure of their place in the world. And David, while grateful for the opportunity, still wasn't entirely sure he belonged. During a break, he stepped out onto the balcony to clear his head. The sun was just beginning to set, casting a golden glow over the Tesla campus. The wind ruffled his hair as he leaned against the railing, staring out at the sprawling city below. It was moments like these that David felt the weight of his responsibility, the immense potential of what he was about to help build. He could see it now, the future unfolding in front of him. A world powered by renewable energy, a cleaner, brighter future for everyone. The sound of footsteps behind him broke his reverie, and he turned to see Elon Musk walking toward him, a slight grin on his face. "You look like you've got a lot on your mind," Elon said, leaning against the railing next to him. David nodded, feeling the gravity of the situation settle in his chest. I don't know if I'm ready for this. It feels like I'm part of something much bigger than I ever imagined." Elon laughed softly, looking out at the horizon. "You're not alone in that. It's easy to feel small when you're looking at a project of this scale, but it's important to remember that everyone starts somewhere. I'm sure you felt the same way before, right? You just need to trust in the work you've already done and in the people around you. We're all in this together." David glanced over at Elon, his doubts softening. For the first time, he realized that he wasn't just part of a company, he was part of a movement. And as much as he had his doubts, he knew that if anyone could bring his ideas to life, it was this team. "I think I'm starting to believe that," David said with a smile. "Good," Elon replied, "because we're just getting started." The first few weeks at Tesla were a whirlwind. Every day was packed with meetings, brainstorming sessions, and late nights at the lab. David had never been surrounded by so many brilliant minds before, and while he was initially overwhelmed, he quickly realized how much he could learn from his colleagues. Yet, despite the collaboration and the constant exchange of ideas, there was a growing sense of unease that clung to him. David had always been a loner, a thinker who thrived in his own space, free from the expectations of others. But now, working with some of the most innovative engineers and scientists in the world, he felt like a small fish in a very big pond. He was constantly second-guessing himself, questioning whether his contributions were enough. Were his ideas truly groundbreaking, or was he simply riding the coattails of the team? Could he keep up with the pace, or would he eventually fall behind? Every time the team discussed the next steps, David felt the weight of his own self-doubt creep in. They were all so confident, so sure of themselves, while David constantly wondered if he belonged in their ranks. And as the weeks went by, that nagging voice in his head grew louder. One particular afternoon, the team gathered for a progress update. They had been working on refining David's proposal for the solar panel algorithm, and there was a palpable sense of excitement in the room. Data was being crunched, simulations were being run, and it seemed like they were on the verge of something revolutionary. But when David presented his latest findings, an adjustment to the solar panel efficiency model, he saw something he hadn't expected: skepticism. The numbers didn't quite add up in the way they should have. The modifications he had made seemed promising on paper, but when tested, they underperformed. Elon was the first to speak up, his face unreadable. "David, this doesn't align with the simulations we ran last week. Can you walk us through your logic here?" David's stomach twisted. He had been so sure that the adjustments were the right path forward. But now, in front of the team, his confidence wavered. He tried to explain the reasoning behind his changes, but his words felt hollow, like they lacked conviction. The team listened intently, but the doubt in their eyes was hard to ignore. As the meeting continued, David could feel the walls closing in on him. His ideas, which had once felt so brilliant, now seemed like mere speculations. His team wasn't convinced, and David's fear of being exposed as a fraud was all-encompassing. After the meeting, David found himself retreating to a quiet corner of the office, away from the prying eyes of his colleagues. He sat at a desk, his hands shaking as he reviewed the numbers once again. But no matter how many times he checked the calculations, they still didn't line up with the results they had hoped for. "Maybe I'm not cut out for this," he muttered to himself. "Maybe I don't belong here." Just then, a voice broke through his self-doubt. "David, you all right?" David looked up to see Lucy, one of the engineers he had grown close to over the past few weeks, standing in the doorway. She was holding a cup of coffee in one hand and a thoughtful expression on her face. I don't know," David said, his voice tinged with frustration. "I thought I had it. I thought I knew what I was doing, but now, it feels like I'm just making mistakes." Lucy stepped into the room and sat down beside him. "Listen, everyone has doubts, especially when they're working on something as big as this. The thing about innovation is that it's messy. It's not always going to work the first time, and that's okay. It's how you learn and adjust that matters." David sighed, rubbing his face with his hands. "But what if I'm not learning fast enough? What if I'm just wasting everyone's time? I'm not like the others. They're all so confident, so smart. I feel like I'm just pretending to be one of them." Lucy raised an eyebrow. "David, you're not pretending. You're here for a reason. You've already brought something to the table that no one else could have. Your unique perspective, your innovative approach to energy storage. That's why they brought you here in the first place. Don't let one setback make you doubt all the work you've done." David didn't know what to say. Part of him wanted to believe her, but the other part, the part filled with fear and doubt, wasn't so sure. "I just feel like I'm not good enough," he admitted softly. "Like I'm one mistake away from being shown the door." Lucy smiled gently, her voice calm but firm. "David, you're not going anywhere. Not because of one mistake. It's what you do next that matters. Keep pushing, keep refining, and keep showing up. You're here because you have something valuable to offer. Don't let a couple of numbers get in the way of that." David nodded, although the weight of his doubts still lingered. But Lucy's words had given him something to hold on to, something to fight for. He couldn't let the fear of failure stop him now, not when he was so close. Later that night, David sat at his desk again, reviewing the numbers and simulations with a fresh perspective. This time, he took a step back. Instead of trying to force the solution to fit, he allowed himself to think outside the box, to experiment with different possibilities. Slowly, he began to uncover new insights, new adjustments that hadn't occurred to him before. It wasn't easy, and it didn't come all at once, but with each iteration, David grew more confident. The road to success was never linear, but he was starting to see that failure wasn't something to fear. It was something to learn from. By the time he was ready to present his revised proposal the next morning, David knew it wasn't perfect. But it was better. It was stronger. And more importantly, it was his. The team gathered once more, and David stood in front of them, ready to present his updates. His voice was steady this time, and though there was still a part of him that doubted, there was also a growing sense of resolve. As he walked them through the new model, explaining each change and why it mattered, he could see the skepticism from the previous meeting beginning to fade. His colleagues were engaged, nodding along as they saw the improvements. When he finished, there was a moment of silence, and then Elon spoke. "This is better," Elon said, his voice filled with approval. "It's not perfect, but it's getting there. Great work, David." David's heart skipped a beat. For the first time in weeks, he felt the weight of his self-doubt begin to lift. It wasn't a perfect solution, and he still had a long way to go, but he was no longer afraid of the journey. The setbacks, the mistakes, they were just part of the process. He had made it through the struggle, and now, he was ready to keep going. The next few weeks were a blur of intense work and late nights. David had thrown himself into the project with a renewed focus, his self-doubt now replaced with a quiet determination. He'd learned the hard way that failure wasn't a dead end. It was just a stepping stone. Every mistake had taught him something valuable, and he was beginning to see how his unique perspective on energy efficiency was fitting into Tesla's larger mission. Despite the late hours and the constant pressure, there was a new sense of camaraderie within the team. David had become more comfortable speaking up in meetings, sharing his ideas, and listening to others. His confidence had grown, not because he was now perfect, but because he was learning how to navigate the complexities of the project. He no longer viewed himself as an outsider trying to keep up. He was now a key player, someone whose ideas were valued. One afternoon, David sat in the team's conference room, his mind racing as he reviewed the latest simulations on his laptop. The room was filled with chatter as his colleagues discussed the next steps, but David couldn't seem to shake the feeling that something wasn't right. His calculations were showing an efficiency boost, but the model wasn't behaving the way it should. The numbers didn't lie, but there was an element he was missing. "Elon," David said, standing up from his chair, interrupting the conversation that had been going on around him. His voice, though still uncertain, was stronger than it had been a few weeks ago. "I think we might be looking at this wrong. The efficiency model is showing great promise, but there's a variable we haven't accounted for: the way environmental factors influence solar panel performance on a micro scale. I think we can optimize this by introducing a localized adjustment." The room fell silent. Everyone turned to look at David, and for a split second, he felt the familiar pang of anxiety, wondering if he had just said something completely off base. But then Elon nodded, his eyes narrowing with interest. "That's an interesting point," Elon said, standing up and walking over to David's laptop. "Show me what you mean." David quickly ran through the data, explaining the logic behind his hypothesis. The idea was simple. While large-scale models of solar energy had been optimized for general environmental conditions, they didn't account for the micro-environmental factors that could influence panel efficiency on a smaller scale. Things like air quality, temperature fluctuations, and even slight shifts in sunlight intensity could have a significant impact on performance, and David believed that adjusting for these factors could unlock a significant increase in energy output. As David spoke, he could see the gears turning in Elon's mind. It wasn't often that David saw Elon get fully engaged in a technical discussion like this, but the glint in Elon's eyes told him that the idea was sparking something. The tension in the room lifted, and the team leaned in, eager to hear more. "All right," Elon said, his voice calm but filled with excitement. "Let's see if we can test this theory. If it works, this could be a game changer." David couldn't help but smile. A few months ago, he would have never imagined himself standing in front of Elon Musk, presenting an idea that could potentially alter the course of the project. But now, it felt natural. He was no longer a nervous young man hoping to prove himself. He was a part of something bigger, something that could change the world. The next few days were a blur of activity. The team worked around the clock to run simulations based on David's proposal, adjusting the solar panel's behavior to account for micro-environmental factors. David felt the pressure mounting again. What if his theory didn't hold up? What if this was just another dead end? But with every new test, the results started to improve. The efficiency of the solar panels began to increase, and the team's excitement grew. One evening, as David sat alone in the lab, watching the data flow in from the latest round of simulations, he heard a familiar voice behind him. "Looking good, David," Elon said, stepping into the lab with a slight smile. "You might just be onto something here." David turned around, his heart racing with excitement. "It's really working, isn't it? The numbers are better than I expected." "They are," Elon replied, his tone serious but pleased. "This could be a breakthrough. I think we're ready for the next phase. Let's start talking about scaling this." David's eyes widened. Scaling? The thought of taking this idea from a small-scale simulation to a real-world application was both thrilling and terrifying. There was so much at stake. But as he looked at the data on his screen, he realized that they were closer than ever to something huge. This wasn't just about improving efficiency. It was about transforming the way energy was produced, distributed, and consumed. "All right," David said, taking a deep breath. "Let's do it." The next few weeks flew by as the team began to prepare for the scaling phase. There were countless meetings, presentations, and technical adjustments as the plan began to take shape. David had to learn to navigate a new set of challenges, working with supply chains, coordinating with field teams, and making sure that the technology would work in the real world. But every time he felt overwhelmed, he would remember the words of encouragement Elon had given him that day. "You're not alone in this. We're in this together." It was easy to forget that sometimes. How big the project was, how many people were working behind the scenes to bring this vision to life. But now, more than ever, David felt like a part of something truly revolutionary. And for the first time, he felt that he was capable of helping to lead that change. One evening, as he sat with his team discussing the final steps before the full-scale implementation of their technology, David found himself reflecting on how far he had come. He had started this journey uncertain, isolated, and unsure of his place in the world. But now, as he looked around at the team, the faces of people who were just as driven, just as passionate as he was, he felt a sense of belonging. This was his family now, in a way. These were the people who would help him change the world. "David," Elon said, breaking his thoughts, "I think it's time we show the world what we've been working on." David nodded, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. They were ready. As the team moved into the final stages of preparation for full-scale implementation, the pressure only intensified. With each passing day, the scope of what they were about to achieve became more and more real. The solar panel project was about to shift from an idea on paper to a living, breathing product, something that could actually make a difference in the world. David could feel the weight of the responsibility. This was no longer just about proving himself to Elon or his colleagues. This was about changing the way the world consumed energy, about making a tangible impact on climate change and creating a future powered by clean, sustainable energy. The stakes were higher than ever, and David's role had never been more critical. The team had been working around the clock to fine-tune the solar panel systems, and David was tasked with overseeing the integration of the new microenvironmental efficiency adjustments into the final model. It was a monumental task, one that required precise coordination between data science, engineering, and field testing. But David was determined to make it work. One evening, as he sat in the lab, reviewing the final calculations and the latest round of test results, the realization hit him. This was it. The moment he had been working towards since he first stepped into Tesla. It wasn't a single breakthrough, but the culmination of hundreds of small steps, each one building on the last. And now, the project was ready for its first real-world test. His phone buzzed, interrupting his thoughts. It was a message from Elon. "We're launching the first test tomorrow. Be ready." David stared at the message for a moment, his heart racing. Tomorrow. This was it. The next morning, the team gathered at the Tesla research facility, where they would begin the first round of large-scale field tests. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation. Engineers, scientists, and technicians were all on edge, knowing that today could be the start of something revolutionary, or the end of the road for their efforts. Elon stood at the front of the room, addressing the team. His usual confidence was tempered with a rare seriousness. "Today is a pivotal moment for Tesla and for all of us. We've worked tirelessly for this. This is more than just a test. It's a proof of concept. We're not just launching a product. We're launching a new era of energy. Let's make sure we do it right." David could feel the weight of Elon's words. This was more than just technology. It was a chance to make a difference in the world. He couldn't afford to let fear or doubt creep in now. This was his moment. The test was scheduled to take place on one of Tesla's largest solar farms, a sprawling site in the Nevada desert. The farm was already equipped with hundreds of solar panels, but today, the team would test their new technology to see if it could truly enhance energy efficiency on a large scale. David and the team arrived early in the morning, the sun just beginning to rise over the horizon. The desert air was crisp, and the silence was only broken by the hum of equipment being set up. As the team gathered around the solar array, David's heart pounded in his chest. This was the first time they would see how the new model performed in real-world conditions. Everything's set up, one of the technicians called out. "We're ready for the first test." Elon gave a sharp nod. "Let's do this." The team watched intently as the new system was powered on. For a few minutes, nothing seemed to happen. The solar panels stood there, motionless in the early morning light. But then the numbers began to come in. The energy output started to climb, slowly at first, and then steadily. David's eyes widened as he saw the efficiency numbers surpass anything they had predicted during testing. The team exchanged glances, and the excitement in the air was palpable. Elon was the first to speak. "It's working. This is real." David could hardly believe it. His heart soared with a mix of disbelief and triumph. After months of hard work, setbacks, doubts, and sleepless nights, they had done it. The system was performing beyond expectations. They were witnessing the future of solar energy unfold right in front of their eyes. But as the test continued, a subtle but unsettling issue arose. The efficiency was higher, but there were slight fluctuations in the data, tiny discrepancies that didn't match the predictions. The performance was still better than anything they had seen before, but it wasn't perfect. David's excitement waned slightly as he studied the data. There was something still off. It wasn't a failure, but it wasn't the flawless victory he had hoped for. "Elon, there's a small issue," David said, breaking the silence. "We're seeing slight fluctuations in energy output. It's not a deal-breaker, but we should investigate it." Elon studied the data for a moment, his face hard to read. "What do you think is causing it?" David bit his lip, his mind racing. "It could be a number of things. Maybe we didn't fully account for some environmental factors, or there's a deeper issue with the way the new system interacts with the existing panels." Elon nodded. "All right, let's dig deeper. We can fix this. This is just the beginning." For the next few hours, the team worked tirelessly to troubleshoot the issue, running tests, adjusting parameters, and recalibrating the system. Despite the minor setback, there was still a sense of momentum. The test wasn't perfect, but the results were undeniable. The system was still more efficient than anything that had come before. As the sun began to set, Elon gathered the team once more. The day had been long and full of tension, but there was a sense of accomplishment in the air. "We've taken the first step," Elon said, his voice calm but filled with conviction. "This is just the beginning. We've proven that our technology works, and we will fix these small issues. We're on the right track." David felt a wave of relief wash over him. They had made it through the first test, and while it wasn't flawless, it had shown undeniable promise. They were closer than ever to changing the world. As the team packed up to leave the desert, David stood for a moment, looking out over the solar farm. The horizon stretched out before him, the setting sun casting a warm glow over the vast array of panels. It was a beautiful sight, a symbol of the future they were working to create. In that moment, David knew one thing for sure. This was just the beginning. The excitement from the successful solar farm test hadn't fully worn off, but the team knew that they weren't out of the woods yet. As the days passed, the small discrepancies in the data from the field test started to nag at everyone. The efficiency improvements were real, but the fluctuations in energy output were too persistent to ignore. David spent every waking moment poring over the data, trying to pinpoint the exact cause of the issues. His team was working just as tirelessly, recalibrating the software, running simulations, and tweaking the parameters. The goal was clear: fix the problem and make the system as flawless as possible. But every solution they tried seemed to lead to another issue, like a game of whack-a-mole. For every glitch they solved, another popped up somewhere else. It was frustrating. At times, David couldn't help but wonder if they had missed something important, some tiny variable that could make all the difference. As the days wore on, the stress began to build. It was one thing to be working on a theory or in the controlled environment of a lab, but now that they were in the field, the pressure to succeed was palpable. David felt it in his chest every time a colleague walked into the lab with new data, every time they ran another test, hoping this one would be the solution. One evening, David found himself sitting alone in his office, staring at the numbers on his screen. The hum of the fluorescent lights above him was the only sound in the otherwise quiet building. He had been at this for hours, trying to track down the inconsistency. His head throbbed. His eyes blurred from the endless stream of calculations. He felt like he was on the verge of a breakthrough. He just needed that one moment of clarity. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Elon. "David," Elon said, stepping into the room. His tone was calm, but there was a seriousness in his eyes. "How's it going?" David rubbed his temples. "I'm trying to figure out what's going wrong. The data's all over the place, and we can't seem to fix it. I keep thinking we're close, but it's like I'm missing something." Elon sat down across from him, a quiet understanding in his gaze. "I know it's frustrating. You've been working around the clock. But remember, every challenge we face is just another step forward. We wouldn't be here if we didn't believe in this. You've already done something incredible. This technology works. Now, we need to refine it." David nodded, though the weight of the challenge still felt heavy on his shoulders. "I know. It's just, I feel like we're so close to something huge, but we can't afford to mess this up." "You're not messing it up," Elon replied. "You're figuring it out, and that's what matters. We're in this together, remember?" David took a deep breath, feeling a small sense of relief. Sometimes, it helped just to hear those words. He wasn't alone in this. They were all working toward the same goal, and no matter how difficult the road ahead seemed, he knew that he couldn't give up now. The next few days were a blur of problem-solving and brainstorming. David worked closely with his team, digging deeper into the software and the hardware, testing every possible adjustment. There was no room for half measures anymore. It was either going to work, or they would have to scrap the entire system and go back to the drawing board. Finally, after another round of grueling tests, David had an idea. The inconsistencies were related to how the system responded to rapid changes in sunlight intensity, something they hadn't fully accounted for. The solar panels were performing optimally under steady conditions, but when the sunlight fluctuated quickly, the efficiency dipped. It was a small problem, but one that could have major implications on the system's ability to perform in real-world conditions. "Wait," David muttered to himself as the realization hit him. He pulled up the simulations and adjusted the algorithms once more, tweaking the way the system responded to changes in light. It wasn't a complete fix, but it could be a solution to the immediate issue. He ran the tests again. The numbers started to stabilize. This time, the fluctuations were minimal. It wasn't perfect yet, but it was progress. The system was getting closer to what they had envisioned. David quickly called a meeting with his team to go over the new adjustments. As they discussed the changes, Elon entered the room. His face was calm, but there was a fire in his eyes. "How's it looking?" Elon asked. David shared the data. "We made some progress. The fluctuations are down significantly, and we're seeing more consistent results. It's not perfect, but it's a step forward." Elon nodded, his expression serious. "Good. Keep pushing. We can do this." With Elon's words of encouragement, the team pushed forward into the next phase of refinement. The days turned into weeks, and despite the challenges, David could feel the momentum building. Slowly but surely, the technology was becoming something more than just a concept. It was turning into a real, functional solution. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, David stood outside the research facility, watching the glowing panels in the distance. It had been a long journey to get here, and there were still challenges ahead. But for the first time in weeks, he allowed himself a moment to appreciate how far they had come. He thought back to his first days at Tesla, when he was unsure of himself, unsure of whether he belonged in the fast-paced world of cutting-edge technology. And now, here he was, leading a team on the verge of creating something world-changing. David smiled to himself, knowing that they weren't just solving a problem, they were changing the future. The excitement that followed their breakthrough had faded, replaced by an overwhelming sense of urgency. The team was on the verge of something massive, but there was no time to rest. The final field test was fast approaching, and this time, it would be the ultimate test of everything they had worked for. David had never felt more pressure. They were beyond the point of fixing small glitches. This was it. This was the test that would determine if their solar panel technology was truly ready for the world. Everything rested on the next few days. The final field test was scheduled to take place at a remote site in Arizona, where Tesla was planning to install a large-scale solar farm to power an entire community. The site was selected specifically for its challenging environmental conditions, high temperatures, dust storms, and the kind of fluctuating sunlight they had struggled with in the past. If their technology could handle this, it could handle anything. David had spent countless hours in the lab perfecting the system, ensuring that the new adjustments would hold up under real-world conditions. But as he stared at the data on his screen, he couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't quite there yet. The system had improved, but there was still a part of him that was unsure. What if they missed something? What if, after all their work, it didn't perform as expected? He shook his head, trying to push the doubts aside. There was no time for second-guessing. They had come too far to turn back now. The night before the test, the team gathered at the research facility for a final briefing. The room was filled with tension, everyone aware of what was at stake. Elon was the last to arrive, his usual confident demeanor tempered by a rare seriousness. He stood at the front of the room, looking out over his team. Tomorrow's test is critical. This is our chance to prove that we can change the world, Elon said, his voice steady but filled with a sense of urgency. We've made great strides, but we can't afford to underestimate the challenges we'll face out there. We need to be ready for anything. David looked around the room. His team was ready, but he could see the same doubt in their eyes that he had felt earlier. They had worked so hard, and the pressure was mounting. But as Elon continued to speak, David realized something important. This was a shared responsibility. They were in this together. If it didn't work, they would all share the blame. But if it did work, they would all share the glory. Elon paused, his gaze settling on David. David, you've led the charge on this. You've brought us here. I believe in you, and I believe in this team. David's heart skipped a beat. He had heard the words before, but now they meant something more. He wasn't just part of the team anymore. He was a leader. And with that leadership came the responsibility to make sure everything went as smoothly as possible. The next morning, the team arrived at the Arizona site before dawn. The desert stretched out endlessly, bathed in the soft light of the rising sun. The air was thick with the promise of a hot day, and the ground beneath their feet was dry and cracked. It was everything they had prepared for. David stood at the edge of the site, taking in the vast array of solar panels that stretched out before him. This was the moment. His mind raced as he double-checked the system, ensuring that everything was in place. Elon approached, his expression unreadable as he surveyed the site. "Let's make this happen," he said quietly. With a deep breath, David gave the signal to begin. The team began powering up the system, activating the newly calibrated solar panels. As the first rays of sunlight hit the panels, David's eyes tracked the data feed on his laptop, watching the numbers carefully. At first, everything seemed to be going smoothly. The system powered up, and the energy output began to climb. But then, just as the sun rose higher in the sky, something unexpected happened. The data started to fluctuate again. The energy output spiked, then dropped, then spiked again. It wasn't the consistent, stable performance they had hoped for. David's heart sank. The same issue they had seen during the first field test was back. "Damn it!" David muttered under his breath, his mind racing. This wasn't just a minor setback, it was a major problem. They couldn't afford to have the system unstable. They were on the verge of changing everything, and if this test failed, it could all come crashing down. Elon stepped closer, sensing the tension. "What's happening?" David's fingers flew over the keyboard, analyzing the data. "The sunlight's fluctuating too much. We're not accounting for the extreme temperature shifts, especially as the sun moves higher in the sky." Elon didn't flinch. "What's the solution?" David thought for a moment. He had an idea, a risky one, but it was their best shot. "We need to modify the software in real time. It's going to require a calibration of the panel's response to the sun's intensity. If we do it right, we should be able to stabilize the output." "Do it," Elon said, his voice calm but insistent. David quickly assembled his team, giving them instructions on how to adjust the software. They worked in sync, like a well-oiled machine, with David at the helm, guiding the changes. The seconds felt like hours as they tweaked the algorithms and reran the tests. The sun climbed higher, beating down on them as the temperature soared. The fluctuations continued, but now they were smaller, more manageable. Slowly, the energy output stabilized, and the system began to level off. David watched the numbers on his screen, his breath caught in his throat. It was working. The performance was improving. The system was starting to respond as they had hoped. "Hold steady," David said, more to himself than to anyone else. The data continued to improve, and after what felt like an eternity, the system finally stabilized. The energy output was consistent. The test had passed. As the team celebrated, David stood off to the side, catching his breath. He had done it. They had done it. After all the challenges, the setbacks, and the doubts, they had finally succeeded. Elon approached him, a rare smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "You did it, David. This is a game changer." David couldn't help but smile. It had been the hardest, most stressful journey of his life, but it had been worth it. This wasn't just a success for Tesla. This was a success for everyone who had ever believed that a better world was possible, and he had been a part of making it happen. "I couldn't have done it without the team," David said, his voice filled with gratitude. Elon nodded. "That's the key, David. We're all in this together." Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The news spread like wildfire. Within hours of their successful test in Arizona, the story was everywhere. Elon Musk and the Tesla team had unveiled a new, cutting-edge solar technology that promised to revolutionize the renewable energy industry. Headlines blared across the globe, each one more ambitious than the last. Tesla's solar tech could power the world. Elon Musk's next big game changer. Clean energy on a global scale. David Sinclair's breakthrough. A leap toward a sustainable future. David had never experienced anything like it. For years, he had worked quietly in the lab, focused on the technical details, content to remain in the background. But now, the spotlight was on him. The media wanted to know who he was, what motivated him, how it felt to be the person behind such a transformative project. He had become the face of the solar technology revolution, and with that came a new set of expectations. As the praise poured in, so did the pressure. Investors, politicians, and climate advocates were all eager to hear about the technology's potential. They wanted to know how soon it could be deployed on a global scale, how it could be integrated into existing infrastructure, and what it would mean for the future of energy. David was suddenly thrust into meetings with some of the most powerful people in the world. His schedule was packed, his phone constantly buzzing with inquiries. It was exhilarating, but it was also overwhelming. He had spent years focusing on the science, on the technology. But now, he had to navigate the complexities of business, policy, and public perception. At first, David embraced the challenge. He felt an incredible sense of pride in the work he and his team had done. He was speaking on stages at international conferences, sitting in on high-level talks with world leaders, and even being interviewed by global news outlets. It felt like a dream. He was part of something bigger than himself, something that could change the world. But soon, the weight of it all began to wear on him. The questions were relentless, the demands unending. Everyone wanted to know when the technology would be ready for mass deployment. They wanted specifics. How soon could they expect to see the solar panels in their homes, their businesses, their cities? And then there were the critics. It didn't take long for some to start questioning whether the technology was as perfect as the headlines suggested. Environmental groups were asking about the impact of large-scale solar installations on local ecosystems. Industry experts were raising concerns about the scalability of the technology. Investors were wondering if the returns would come fast enough to justify the massive infrastructure investment. David found himself caught between two extremes. On one side, the overwhelming excitement and support for the technology, and on the other, the rising tide of skepticism and doubt. Every decision, every statement, seemed to be scrutinized, amplified, and twisted. For the first time in his career, David felt like he couldn't keep up. One evening, after another exhausting day of meetings and interviews, David sat alone in his office, staring at the wall. His thoughts were racing, but his mind was also oddly numb. The weight of the world was on his shoulders, and he wasn't sure how much longer he could carry it. His phone buzzed, breaking his thoughts. It was a message from Elon. "Meet me for dinner. You've earned it." David stared at the message for a moment before responding. "I could really use a break." An hour later, David found himself sitting across from Elon at a quiet restaurant, the clink of silverware and the murmur of other patrons fading into the background. Elon leaned back in his chair, a glass of wine in front of him, his usual calm demeanor in place. "You've been killing it, David," Elon said, his tone sincere. "I know it's a lot, but you're doing something amazing." David nodded, but the words felt hollow. "I don't know, Elon. It feels like there's too much pressure. Everyone expects so much, and I'm not sure we can deliver it all. The tech works, but are we ready for what comes next? I don't know how to manage all this." Elon's gaze softened. "You don't have to have all the answers, David. That's the thing about leadership. You don't always have a clear path. You just have to keep moving forward, even when it feels like you're walking blind." David let out a deep breath. "It's just overwhelming. I've never had to deal with this much attention before. I'm not sure I'm cut out for it." "You are," Elon said firmly. "Look, the media will move on. The critics will come and go. But the work you're doing here, that's what will stand the test of time. You've built something that will change the world. The rest is just noise." David felt a small sense of relief. "I guess I just have to keep reminding myself of that. It's easy to get lost in everything else." "You're doing fine," Elon said. "You've been doing this for years without the spotlight. You're more than capable. Just take it one step at a time. And if you need a break, don't be afraid to take one. We're all in this together." For the first time in weeks, David allowed himself to relax, if only for a moment. The conversation with Elon had given him the perspective he needed. There would always be pressure, always be doubt, but as long as they stayed focused on the bigger picture, they could overcome it. The next day, David returned to the office with a renewed sense of purpose. He was still tired, still overwhelmed, but he knew he had to keep going. The technology was too important. The world was watching, yes, but they had the power to change it. With each meeting, each presentation, David grew more confident. He spoke with clarity, answering questions with the knowledge that he had the answers. He trusted in the work they had done, and when the inevitable criticisms came, he faced them with a steady resolve. They had made it this far, and they would keep moving forward. The next phase was looming, mass deployment of the technology, and the team was working tirelessly to prepare. But in those quiet moments between the chaos, David could feel the weight of history on his shoulders. He wasn't just part of a team. He was part of something that would change the future. And that, David realized, was all that mattered. The whirlwind of press coverage, investor meetings, and public appearances had subsided slightly, but the real work was only just beginning. The successful test in Arizona had sparked unprecedented interest, and now, Tesla's solar technology was about to face its biggest challenge, scaling up. The pressure was mounting as David and his team prepared to expand their technology from small, controlled installations to massive solar farms capable of powering entire cities. This wasn't just about making the technology work. It was about making it work at an unimaginable scale. David had spent years fine-tuning the software, tweaking the algorithms, and testing the panels in controlled environments. But scaling it up meant taking the technology from a few dozen panels to hundreds of thousands. The logistics were complex, the infrastructure needed to be optimized, and the potential for failure was high. Despite the mounting pressure, David threw himself into the project. He was up early and stayed late, juggling meetings with government officials, contractors, and engineers. His phone seemed to never stop ringing, and he was constantly on the move. The tech was ready for the next phase. But could the world's infrastructure support it? One morning, David found himself sitting across from a group of logistics experts who were tasked with managing the distribution and installation of the solar panels. The room was filled with charts, maps, and blueprints, all outlining the scale of the endeavor. "You're asking us to install tens of thousands of panels in less than 6 months," one of the experts, Carol, said, her voice filled with concern. "We've never done anything like this before. The sheer number of logistics involved, transportation, installation, maintenance, it's a logistical nightmare." David nodded, his mind racing. "I know it's ambitious, but we don't have a choice. We've already proven that the technology works in the field. Now we have to make sure we can roll it out at a larger scale." Carol wasn't convinced. "Even with the technology perfected, we're dealing with a lot of variables. Weather, local regulations, Labor shortages. We can't predict everything. David ran a hand through his hair. He knew she was right. They couldn't control every variable. But they had come this far, and they couldn't afford to stop now. We need to be agile, David said, his voice firm. We have to build a network of suppliers, contractors, and local teams that can handle the scale. We need to have contingency plans in place for every possible setback. We can't afford to let this slip. Carol looked skeptical, but after a moment, she nodded. I'll help you with the planning, but we need to be realistic. If we want to meet that timeline, we'll need a miracle. David wasn't sure if miracles were in the cards, but he was determined to try. As the days turned into weeks, the scale of the challenge became increasingly apparent. The supply chain alone was an enormous hurdle. Tesla was working with hundreds of manufacturers to source the materials they needed: solar cells, battery packs, and specialized components. But coordinating everything was a monumental task. David spent most of his time reviewing blueprints, meeting with contractors, and managing the team. The days blurred together. At times, he felt like he was living in a constant state of urgency, his every waking moment consumed by the sheer magnitude of the task. Yet, amid the chaos, David saw something incredible happening. As the project moved forward, he began to witness the power of collaboration. Engineers, logisticians, and technicians from every corner of the globe were coming together to make this happen. People who had never met before were now working side by side, each one contributing their expertise to the greater good. David's role had shifted too. He was no longer just the lead engineer or the scientist with the vision. He was becoming a leader in the truest sense. Someone who could inspire others, who could make decisions under pressure, and who could keep the team focused on the bigger picture. The first major deployment began in Nevada, where Tesla had secured a contract to power a remote town with their new solar technology. David stood in the middle of the construction site, watching as workers erected rows of solar panels under the blazing sun. The heat was intense, the dust was thick in the air, and the work was grueling, but the progress was undeniable. It wasn't perfect. There were hiccups along the way. A shipment of panels was delayed by a week due to a weather system that had grounded flights across the country. Another shipment was damaged in transit, forcing the team to find replacements at the last minute. Even with all the preparation, it seemed that every step forward was met with a new obstacle. David felt the pressure creeping in again, just like before. The fear of failure, the worry that something would go wrong, that they weren't quite ready for what was at stake. But each time a challenge arose, David reminded himself of what they had already achieved. They had proven that the technology worked. They had proven that it could handle the real-world demands of energy production. Now, they just had to prove that they could scale it, no matter the obstacles. It was at that moment that Elon showed up on site, a rare visit to see the progress firsthand. He walked toward David, his usual confidence radiating, despite the dust and chaos of the construction site. "How's it going?" Elon asked. David exhaled, wiping sweat from his brow. "It's a lot harder than I thought it would be, but we're making progress. We've hit a few snags, but we're working through them." Elon nodded, his eyes scanning the rows of panels being installed. "It's not supposed to be easy, David. If it were easy, it wouldn't be worth doing. But you're doing it. You're making it happen." David looked at Elon, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. "I just keep thinking that maybe we're in over our heads." Elon smiled. "Everyone feels that way at some point. But look around you. This is the future you're building. And you're not doing it alone. You have an entire team behind you." David let out a breath, feeling a wave of relief. It wasn't all on him. It was on all of them. And they were going to make it happen, together. As the first solar farm in Nevada went live, the numbers started to roll in. The energy production was higher than expected. The community was thriving under the new, clean power. The technology was working. And even though the journey had been anything but smooth, the results spoke for themselves. For David, it was a moment of triumph. They had crossed the first major hurdle in scaling up, but it was just the beginning. There were more challenges ahead, more obstacles to overcome. But the dream was becoming a reality, one panel at a time. The Nevada solar farm was up and running, and it was more successful than anyone had imagined. The energy output was impressive, and the small town that now relied on Tesla's solar technology was thriving. For a brief moment, it felt like they had conquered the world. But David knew better than to rest on his laurels. The real test wasn't just about powering one town. It was about powering the world. The first wave of success had brought with it a new set of problems. The technology was working, but there were still massive hurdles to overcome. As the project scaled to other regions, the team encountered unforeseen complications, bureaucratic red tape, economic resistance, and political pushback. It seemed as though, for every step they took forward, they were confronted with another obstacle. David found himself in a meeting with a group of government officials from the state of California, a state known for its ambitious green energy policies. They were interested in partnering with Tesla to deploy the solar technology across multiple cities, but the discussions quickly turned tense. "You're telling us that this technology is ready to be scaled, but we need more guarantees," one of the officials, Karen, said, tapping her pen on the table. "What if the panels fail? What if there's a problem with energy production down the line?" David leaned forward, trying to maintain his composure. "The panels are tested and reliable. We've done extensive field testing. They've performed well in extreme conditions. We're confident in their durability." Karen raised an eyebrow. "I understand that, but we've seen technologies come and go. We need more than just confidence. We need a proven track record. And even if your technology works, how are we supposed to integrate it with the current grid infrastructure? That's not an easy task." David's stomach tightened. The bureaucratic hurdles were always harder to navigate than the technical ones. "We're working with grid operators to ensure seamless integration. We're also working on new smart grid technology that can optimize energy distribution in real time. We're talking about billions of dollars in investments, David. You need to prove that you can handle it," Karen said, her tone cold. "This isn't just about your technology. This is about the future of our entire energy grid." David's mind raced. He had known that political resistance would be part of the process, but hearing it firsthand was sobering. It wasn't just about creating something revolutionary. It was about convincing an entire system that change was possible. And that was never going to be easy. Later that day, David called a meeting with his core team to discuss the political roadblocks. Elon was present, his face as stoic as ever. "We can't keep running into these same issues," David said, pacing the room. "We're proving that the technology works, but they're demanding more proof, more guarantees. The bureaucrats are holding us back." Elon raised an eyebrow. "That's always going to be the case when you're disrupting an established system. But we've got something they can't ignore. The technology works. We just need to keep pushing forward." David ran a hand through his hair. "It's not just the technology, though. It's the infrastructure." They're right. Integrating into the existing grid is a massive challenge, and they're not willing to take that risk without assurances. "We've got to make them see the potential," Elon said. "It's not enough to just show them the numbers. We need to demonstrate what this can do for the community. They need to see that this isn't just about clean energy. It's about economic growth, job creation, and energy independence." David nodded slowly. "I get that, but we can't do it alone. We need more political allies. We need to show them that this isn't just a tech project, it's a movement." Elon leaned forward. "Exactly. We need to rally the public behind us. If we can build a groundswell of support, the politicians will have no choice but to follow. It's about making this a cause, not just a business." David was starting to understand. It wasn't enough to be right. It wasn't enough to have the best technology. They needed to build a coalition. They needed to frame this as a global movement, not just an industrial project. But building that movement wasn't going to be easy. The more David and Elon pushed forward, the more they encountered pushback from entrenched interests. Fossil fuel companies, local utilities, and even some environmental groups began to lobby against the new technology. There were accusations that the panels were too expensive, that the grid wasn't ready for renewable energy at this scale, and that the technology wasn't as reliable as promised. David was on a flight to Washington, D.C. to meet with a group of influential senators who were considering supporting the project. He sat in the plane, staring out the window, reflecting on the enormous task ahead. It wasn't just about making a great product, it was about selling it, convincing people that it was the future, and that future was worth the investment. He had prepared for this meeting for weeks, But now that it was here, he felt the weight of the responsibility settling on his shoulders. It was no longer just about him and his team. It was about the entire future of renewable energy and whether or not they could get the world on board. The meeting in Washington, D.C. was even more challenging than David had anticipated. The senators were polite, but skeptical. They asked pointed questions about the long-term viability of the technology, the costs of large-scale implementation, and the economic impact on local industries. David fielded their questions with precision, laying out Tesla's plans for expansion, the economic benefits of clean energy, and the potential job creation that would come with widespread deployment of solar technology. But it wasn't just facts and figures that he needed to convey. He had to tap into something deeper, something that spoke to their core values. He had to make them understand that this wasn't just about business, it was about saving the planet. After hours of back and forth, the room grew quiet. David could feel the tension building. Finally, Senator Phillips, a key figure in the committee, leaned forward. "You've convinced us that the technology works," she said slowly. "But what about the politics? The grid infrastructure? The resistance from entrenched industries?" David took a deep breath. "We've been addressing those issues head-on. We're working with local grid operators to design a solution that works for everyone. And as for the resistance, change is never easy. But this isn't just about a product. It's about a movement. And movements change the world." Senator Phillips studied him for a long moment. Then, to his surprise, she nodded. "I'll be watching. But you've made your case. Keep it up, Mr. Sinclair." As David left the meeting, he felt a sense of cautious optimism. It wasn't a victory yet, but it was a step in the right direction. He had learned an important lesson that day. Scaling a global movement required more than just a breakthrough product. It required patience, persistence, and the ability to navigate the complex web of politics, economics, and public opinion. He wasn't just changing the way the world generated energy, he was changing the way the world thought about energy. And that, he realized, was going to take time. As the months passed, the momentum around Tesla's solar technology began to grow. The energy sector was abuzz with talks of a revolution, one that promised to radically reshape the way the world approached energy. But with great promise came an even greater cost. David sat at his desk one afternoon, staring at the latest financial projections. The numbers didn't lie. The scale of the project was outpacing their funding, and the clock was ticking. There were still millions of dollars in outstanding contracts, raw materials needed for the solar panels, and new hires to support the growing operation. It was a classic case of too much, too soon. And it wasn't just the funds for the technology itself. It was the costs of building out the entire infrastructure, from manufacturing plants to distribution channels to installation teams. As if on cue, David's phone buzzed. It was a message from Elon. "Elon, we need to talk. Urgent." David sighed and rubbed his temples. He could already guess what was coming. The same question had been lingering in the back of his mind for weeks. Could they afford to keep this up? Elon's message confirmed his fears. The funding gap was becoming insurmountable. Tesla's investors had been extremely supportive, but even their patience had limits. The cost of expanding the solar program was beginning to strain even their deep pockets. David had to face the reality. If they didn't secure new financing soon, the entire project, one of the most promising advancements in clean energy, could fall apart. Later that day, David met Elon in a small conference room at Tesla's headquarters. Elon was already there, as usual, with a coffee cup in hand, his gaze fixed on a stack of papers. "I've been looking at the numbers too," Elon said, breaking the silence. "We're running out of runway, David. If we don't secure additional funding in the next few weeks, we'll be in serious trouble." David leaned forward, frustration mounting. "I know. We've been putting together projections, and the cost of scaling is astronomical. We have to keep pushing, but it's becoming more and more difficult to convince investors that we can keep up this pace without a steady cash flow." Elon nodded, his expression hardening. "It's not just about the money, David. It's about timing. If we don't get the funding now, we risk losing our momentum. Our competition is watching. We've already caught the attention of some of the big players in the energy market. If they see weakness, they'll pounce." David's heart raced. He had known that the stakes were high, but hearing Elon's words made the reality hit harder. This wasn't just about running a startup anymore. It was about preserving the future of clean energy. One wrong move, and it could all come crashing down. "We've got to figure out a way to make it work," David said, his voice firm. "We've already come this far. We can't afford to lose it all now." Elon studied him for a long moment. "We're going to need to make some tough decisions. I'm talking about risk. I'm talking about taking a step into the unknown. We need a new partner, someone with deep pockets and the vision to see where this is going. Otherwise, we're going to run out of options." David wasn't thrilled with the idea of taking on a new partner, especially one with a different agenda, but he knew it might be their only choice. They couldn't afford to let pride or hesitation get in the way. If they wanted to change the world, they had to think bigger than ever before. "We need to bring in someone who believes in this vision as much as we do," David said. "But we also need to make sure we don't compromise our mission. If we bring in the wrong partner, it could change everything." Elon gave him a long look. "Agreed. We can't afford to lose control of the vision, but we also can't afford to lose momentum. It's time to start talking to some of the big players in the industry. We need someone who can see the bigger picture, not just the bottom line." The next few days were a whirlwind. David and Elon met with several potential investors and partners, each more anxious than the last. The meetings were tense, filled with back-and-forth negotiation over terms and conditions, equity stakes, and, most importantly, control over the direction of the project. One particular meeting stood out. David and Elon were seated across from a group of venture capitalists, investors known for their appetite for high-risk, high-reward ventures. The VCs were keenly interested in Tesla's solar technology, but their questions were pointed, and their terms non-negotiable. "So, tell us again why we should invest in this." One of the VCs, a woman named Rachel, asked, her arms crossed. "You've proven that your technology works, but we're still not seeing a clear path to profitability. What guarantees can you give us that this won't end up being a massive failure?" David took a deep breath. The world is shifting. The demand for clean, renewable energy is growing every year. The market for solar energy is only going to get bigger. And with Tesla's expertise in manufacturing and distribution, we're positioned to lead the charge. We believe that by taking on the risk now, we can dominate the energy market for the next century. Rachel raised an eyebrow. "That's a bold statement. But you're asking us to invest millions, maybe billions, in something that hasn't proven its scalability. What happens if you hit another roadblock? What happens if you run out of money again?" David glanced at Elon, who remained calm, seemingly unshaken by the pressure. The room was silent for a moment before Elon spoke. "We won't run out of money," Elon said, his voice steady. "We've made it this far. We have a plan for scaling, and we're committed to executing it. We just need the resources to do so. If you invest in us, you're investing in the future. But the future is now." Rachel looked between Elon and David. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Finally, she nodded. "We'll need to do some more due diligence, but I'm intrigued. I think we can make a deal." David felt a surge of hope. They weren't out of the woods yet, but this was a significant step in the right direction. Weeks passed, and after countless negotiations, Tesla secured the funding they so desperately needed. It was a massive deal, one that would allow the project to expand rapidly without losing control over the core mission. But David knew that the real challenge had only just begun. With the money secured, they still had to prove that they could execute at scale. They had to build the infrastructure, expand the workforce, and continue to innovate in ways they hadn't yet imagined. David sat in his office that night, staring out the window at the city lights below. The path ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in weeks, he felt a glimmer of hope. They had the resources. They had the vision. They had the will. And now, it was time to prove it. It was early morning when David stepped into the conference room, his mind racing with the enormity of the task ahead. They had secured the necessary funding, but the scale of the project now required something far beyond just resources. They needed a plan for execution, and it had to be flawless. As he walked into the room, Elon was already there, as usual, seated at the head of the table. He had a serious expression on his face, a rarity. Next to him were several key members of the leadership team, engineers, financiers, and communications experts. The team had grown, and it was becoming harder to coordinate. David had always known that managing growth would be challenging, but now the weight of it felt almost unbearable. "Morning," David said, sitting down at the table. "Let's get to it." Elon gave him a curt nod. "We've got a lot to cover. We've secured the funds, but scaling the project at this level is going to require major infrastructure development. We'll need to rapidly expand manufacturing, build out the grid systems, and recruit thousands of new employees." David took a deep breath. This was the moment they had been working toward, but now that they were on the precipice of global expansion, the pressure was beginning to mount. It wasn't just about the technology working anymore. It was about building the systems and teams that would support it. Elon turned to the rest of the group. "We need to be aggressive. We can't afford delays. Our competitors are watching, and we need to outpace them." David nodded. "I agree. The public wants clean energy, but the political and business pressures are intense. We need to maintain momentum." As the meeting continued, the discussion became a blur of technical details and strategic plans. David was overwhelmed with the amount of information being thrown at him. There were logistical challenges to navigate, political pressure to deal with, and hiring quotas to meet. As the scope of their operations expanded, so too did the complexity of the decisions they had to make. The conversation shifted to a particular issue: the difficulty of securing enough land to install solar farms. There were delays in obtaining permits, disputes with local governments, and environmental concerns. "We need to cut through the red tape," David said, his frustration beginning to show. "Every time we move forward, it feels like we're hit with another setback." "We'll have to make some difficult compromises," Elon said calmly. "That's the nature of the game at this level. We may need to bypass some smaller jurisdictions and go straight to the larger metropolitan areas." The idea made David uneasy. Bypassing smaller, less developed regions could mean missing opportunities to bring clean energy to communities that needed it the most. But he also knew that the larger cities, those with the infrastructure and the resources, were where the real impact could be made. Later that afternoon, David found himself in a meeting with the legal team, sorting through contracts, land rights, and regulatory hurdles. The project scale was becoming a logistical nightmare. The promise of clean energy seemed more distant as David realized the immense responsibility that rested on his shoulders. "I never thought it would be this hard," he muttered to himself, scrolling through a mountain of paperwork. "When you're sitting in the lab, developing the technology, it all seems so simple. But now—" He paused, his thoughts turning inward. That night, David couldn't shake the feeling of being stretched too thin. The pressure was unlike anything he had ever experienced, and the weight of the project's success and failure felt too heavy to bear. At the same time, he knew there was no going back. He had made a commitment, not just to Tesla, but to the millions of people who stood to benefit from the clean energy revolution they were trying to create. As he sat in his office, his phone buzzed again. It was another message from Elon. "Elon, we need to talk. Meet me at the lab. Now." David's heart skipped a beat. He knew this wasn't going to be another routine meeting. Something big was coming. At the lab, Elon was already pacing when David walked in. The lab had always been a place of quiet innovation, but tonight the air felt thick with tension. "What's going on?" David asked, feeling a knot form in his stomach. Elon stopped pacing and looked him directly in the eye. "We've hit a snag. A big one." David's mind raced, trying to anticipate what could be so urgent. "What happened?" "It's the supply chain," Elon said, his voice laced with frustration. "We've been relying on certain manufacturers for the materials we need for the solar panels, but they've started to run into their own issues. They can't keep up with our demand. And without those materials, our entire timeline is in jeopardy." David felt his stomach drop. They couldn't afford another delay, not now. "What's the backup plan?" "We're working on it," Elon said. "But we're going to need to find new suppliers, ones that can match our pace. It's going to take time, and we might have to increase our budget." David pinched the bridge of his nose. They had enough problems with the money they had secured. Increasing the budget would mean even more pressure. "Can we push the timelines?" David asked, though he knew the answer. Elon shook his head. "It's already tight. If we slow down now, we risk losing the market advantage. Our competitors will catch up, and we'll lose the initiative." David knew Elon was right. They couldn't afford to lose their edge, not after everything they had sacrificed. But at the same time, it felt like they were walking on a razor's edge. Any wrong move could lead to disaster. The following weeks were a blur of frantic calls, late-night meetings, and constant problem-solving. The team was working around the clock to secure new suppliers and manage the growing demands of production. The mounting pressure took its toll on everyone. David noticed the stress in his team's faces, the exhaustion, the anxiety. He could feel it in himself, too. There were days when it felt like they were drowning in the weight of it all. But despite the tension, David couldn't ignore the passion and commitment that still burned in the hearts of his team. They believed in this project, they believed in the future it represented. And that belief was what kept them moving forward, even when everything seemed to be falling apart. One evening, as David was reviewing the latest financial forecasts, a thought struck him. He couldn't do this alone. He had built this project from the ground up, but now it was bigger than him. It was bigger than Tesla. He needed to rely on the strength of his team. They needed to trust each other and lean on one another. As David made his way back to his office, he stopped for a moment and looked out at the city below. The lights flickered in the distance, and he thought about the millions of people who stood to benefit from their work. The path ahead would be difficult, but it was one they had chosen together. He exhaled deeply, accepting the responsibility that came with leadership, the sacrifices, the sleepless nights, and the difficult decisions. It wasn't just about creating a new energy solution anymore. It was about leading a movement. And that meant navigating the chaos and uncertainty with strength, resilience, and unwavering conviction. This wasn't just about making a profit. It was about changing the world. The following weeks were filled with chaos and urgency. As Tesla pushed to meet deadlines, the pressure intensified on every front. The supply chain disruptions were just the beginning. There were growing concerns about the impact of their expansion on local communities, environmental sustainability, and even labor conditions in some of their overseas factories. David found himself in increasingly difficult conversations, both with his team and with external stakeholders. The realization hit him that not all progress came without a cost. It was mid-afternoon when David was summoned to another meeting, this time with the head of Tesla's ethics department, Maya. She was a calm, thoughtful leader, someone who always considered the broader impact of every decision. As David entered her office, he could immediately sense the tension in the room. "David, we need to talk," Maya said, motioning for him to sit down. She handed him a thick folder, marked with the word urgent in red. "These are some concerns we've been receiving, both internally and from third-party sources, about our manufacturing practices overseas." David furrowed his brow. What kind of concerns? Maya flipped open the folder and began to read aloud. "Reports of unsafe working conditions in some of our partner factories in Asia. We've also seen some issues with environmental impacts in certain regions where we source raw materials for our solar panels. These are serious, David. If they come to light publicly, it could damage Tesla's reputation irreparably." David's stomach churned. He had always believed in the mission of Tesla, to create sustainable energy solutions and reduce humanity's reliance on fossil fuels. But now, facing these allegations, he couldn't ignore the conflict between progress and ethics. "What are we doing about it?" David asked, trying to steady his voice. "We've contacted our partners to begin investigations, but we're not sure what we'll find. Some of these issues are systemic, and if they are true, we may have to halt production in certain regions or change our supplier relationships entirely. But that could lead to delays, big delays." David leaned back in his chair, absorbing the weight of the situation. This wasn't just about meeting deadlines or staying ahead of the competition anymore. This was about whether the company could truly live up to the values it preached. "Do we have any backup suppliers or alternative sources?" he asked. "Not that can meet our current scale," Maya said, her voice strained. "If we want to maintain production levels, we're looking at making major concessions in terms of sustainability." David's mind raced. He thought about the people, millions, who were counting on Tesla's success. A delay, a major scandal, it could send shockwaves through the clean energy sector. It wasn't just about their company anymore. It was about the future of renewable energy itself. David spent the next few days in deep reflection. He couldn't shake the sense of guilt that settled over him. The solar project was more than a business. It was a movement. Tesla had promised to not only change the world, but to do it in a way that was ethical and responsible. But now, the reality of scaling up had led to compromises that no one had anticipated. As he sat in his office late one evening, staring at the reports Maya had given him, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Elon. Elon, we need to meet. I've been talking to our partners, and there's a new issue. Come to the lab. David exhaled deeply. He didn't know if he was ready for another conversation about crisis management, but he knew there was no avoiding it. At the lab, Elon was pacing again, his expression tight with frustration. When he saw David walk in, he immediately began speaking. We've got a bigger problem than we thought. Our main supplier has dropped the ball. And worse, there's been a serious incident at one of our facilities in Southeast Asia. The workers are protesting, saying they're being exposed to dangerous materials and unsafe working conditions. We're going to need to address this immediately. David felt his chest tighten. We can't let this blow up in the media. If this gets out, it'll be catastrophic for Tesla's reputation. Not to mention, it undermines everything we've worked for. Elon didn't look up, his mind clearly racing. I know, but it's not just about the media storm. The workers are right. And that's the bigger issue. We can't sacrifice safety and ethics for the sake of production. David's mind flashed back to Maya's meeting. The reports were starting to align. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that Tesla had a choice to make. They could choose the easy route, putting profits and deadlines over people, or they could make the difficult decision to put everything on the line for their core values. Maybe it's time we take a step back, David said, his voice unexpectedly calm. We're moving too fast. We've become so focused on scaling that we've lost sight of our original mission. This company is built on the promise of sustainability and responsibility, not just in terms of energy, but in every aspect of how we operate. If we keep pushing forward without addressing these issues, we risk losing the very essence of what Tesla stands for. Elon looked at him sharply. Are you suggesting we slow down? Or worse, shut down operations in certain regions? That could bankrupt us. David didn't flinch. I'm suggesting we look at the bigger picture. If we continue to ignore these ethical issues, the long-term damage could be far worse than any financial setback. We have to do the right thing, even if it costs us. There was a long silence between them. Elon finally dropped his gaze, his expression conflicted. I hate it when you're right, he muttered. But I know you are. The question is, what are we going to do about it? The next few weeks were some of the most challenging of David's career. He and Elon worked together to make the difficult decisions that would shape Tesla's future. They halted production in certain regions while they investigated the safety concerns, cutting ties with suppliers who couldn't meet Tesla's high ethical standards. The company took a hit, financially and publicly, but David felt it was the right choice. They also committed to increasing transparency, ensuring that every factory and supplier adhered to strict sustainability and labor standards. It meant that Tesla had to rethink its entire supply chain, but David was convinced that this was the path forward, one that would allow them to scale responsibly without compromising the core values of the company. One evening, as David sat at his desk, reading through the latest reports, his phone buzzed again. It was a message from Elon. Elon, I think we're on the right track, David. It's not easy, but we'll come out stronger for it. We've built a company that values people first, and that's why we'll succeed in the end. David smiled to himself, a sense of relief washing over him. They had made the hard decision, and in doing so, they had found their true purpose. It wasn't just about building a better energy solution. It was about building a better world. The weeks that followed David's decision to halt production in certain regions were tense, but there was an unexpected sense of relief among the team. There was no denying that Tesla had taken a significant hit financially. Delays were inevitable, and there would be backlash from stakeholders and investors. But as David walked through the halls of Tesla's headquarters, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The right decision had been made, and while the path forward was uncertain, it was now a path they could be proud of. It was late afternoon when David received a call that would change everything. He had just returned from a meeting with their public relations team, who had been crafting a statement about Tesla's commitment to ethical sourcing and sustainability. The press release would be going out the next morning, but the phone call came before he could even sit down at his desk. Elon, David answered, his voice steady but alert. "Elon's with a group of investors right now," came the reply from Elon's assistant. "But we've got an urgent situation. One of our competitors, SolarTech, just announced a massive new solar product that could disrupt everything we've worked for. They found a way to significantly cut costs and increase efficiency." David felt a sudden jolt of anxiety. Tesla's solar project was supposed to be the next big thing in renewable energy. But if SolarTech had found a breakthrough that could make their panels cheaper and more efficient, it would undermine Tesla's entire strategy. The company couldn't afford to lose its edge in a market that was already fiercely competitive. "What are we doing about it?" David asked, his mind already racing. "We're looking into it," came the assistant's voice. "But we'll need your expertise to respond." David's stomach tightened. He knew this was the kind of challenge that could make or break Tesla's future in the solar industry. But it also reminded him of one fundamental truth. Tesla had always been a leader in innovation. They couldn't let their competitors dictate the pace of progress. They had to act. The next morning, David gathered the leadership team in the conference room. The investors' meeting with Elon had concluded, and the team was now on high alert. Everyone was aware of the stakes, and David could feel the tension in the room. Elon stood at the head of the table, his eyes scanning the group. "We have a new player in the market, SolarTech. They've developed a cost-efficient solar panel with better energy conversion rates than our current models. This is a game changer. But I'm not worried." David raised an eyebrow. "Not worried?" "Elon, they're taking the lead in solar technology, and we're behind." Elon nodded, unfazed. "We're Tesla. We don't follow, we lead. We've been in tight spots before, and we always come out on top. The question is, how do we respond?" David couldn't deny Elon's confidence. The truth was, Tesla had overcome seemingly insurmountable challenges in the past. They had been innovators from the beginning, pushing boundaries when everyone else played it safe. But this was different. The industry was changing fast, and SolarTech's breakthrough could give them a significant advantage in the market. "We need to pivot," David said, his voice calm but resolute. "It's time to rethink our approach to solar energy. We've been focused on large-scale solar farms, but there's an opportunity to tap into the residential market. We need to create more affordable, scalable solutions that can be installed directly in homes and businesses. We'll make it easy for people to adopt solar energy without having to invest in massive infrastructure." The room fell silent. David could feel the weight of their decision. This would be a risky move, shifting from large-scale projects to a more distributed model, where Tesla would face both new challenges and new competitors. But David believed it was the right choice. "We'll need to double down on our research and development," David continued. "We need to innovate, to make our technology more affordable and accessible. It's not just about beating SolarTech. It's about making solar energy something that every home, every business can access." Elon smiled. "I like it. Let's do it." Over the following months, Tesla launched an intensive R&D initiative to develop a new line of residential solar products. The goal was to create solar panels that were not only cheaper but also more efficient and easier to install. They partnered with construction companies, home builders, and energy retailers to ensure that Tesla's solar solutions would be available for everyone, from suburban homes to urban businesses. David worked closely with the engineering team, overseeing the development of new technologies that could compete with SolarTech's cost-efficient panels. There were sleepless nights, long meetings, and countless prototypes. But slowly, they began to see progress. Tesla's new solar products were starting to take shape. However, there were still challenges. The manufacturing process for these new panels was more complex, requiring more advanced materials and cutting-edge technology. The team faced hurdles with supply chains, material costs, and scalability. It seemed like every time they solved one problem, another one emerged. But through it all, David remained committed. He knew that Tesla's mission wasn't just about competing with SolarTech. It was about creating a new energy future. He couldn't afford to lose sight of the bigger picture. One day, David stood in the lab, examining the first prototype of the new residential solar panel. It was sleek, compact, and more efficient than any of Tesla's previous models. But there was a sense of anxiety gnawing at him. They had made incredible strides, but the reality of the market was daunting. Would people embrace this new model? Would they take the leap to solar energy, or would the cost still be a barrier for most? As he walked through the lab, he was joined by Elon. The two of them stood side by side, looking at the prototypes that had come so far. "You've done something incredible here," Elon said, his voice full of admiration. David shrugged. "It's not enough yet. We've still got a long way to go before we can make a real impact. We need to get the pricing right, the installation process right. We need to make solar energy affordable for everyone." Elon nodded. "But you've laid the groundwork, and that's what matters. We've been given a chance to change the game once again. You've shown me what's possible." David paused, reflecting on how far they had come. Tesla was no longer just a car company or an energy provider. It was a force of innovation and progress. The journey had been difficult, but every challenge had forged them into something stronger. "I just hope people are ready for this," David said, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "They will be," Elon said with a smile. "They always are. We're just giving them a chance to see the future." Weeks later, Tesla's new residential solar products were ready for launch. The first units were installed in homes across the country, and the response was overwhelmingly positive. People were excited about the prospect of cheaper, more accessible solar energy. Tesla had once again disrupted the market, not with the flash of a new idea, but with the quiet persistence of a company that understood what truly mattered. David watched as the first customers signed on for the new solar panels, and he felt a sense of pride swell within him. They hadn't just responded to competition. They had anticipated the future and shaped it. As the sun set over the Tesla campus, David felt a quiet moment of clarity. They had not only built the future of solar energy, they had done it on their own terms, with integrity and responsibility. And that was a legacy worth pursuing. It had been 2 months since Tesla's residential solar panels had launched. The feedback was positive, but there was no denying that the real challenge was just beginning. Tesla had made the bold decision to disrupt the solar market, but now they had to prove that it wasn't just a flash in the pan. The team had worked tirelessly to develop a product that could compete with solar tech's efficiency, but the question remained. Could they scale it quickly enough to meet the overwhelming demand? David walked through the production floor of the Tesla Gigafactory, where the new solar panels were being manufactured. The hum of machinery filled the air, but there was a palpable tension beneath the surface. Workers were moving quickly, trying to meet tight deadlines. Yet, despite their best efforts, the demand was far outstripping their ability to produce. They were running into bottlenecks in the assembly line, and material shortages had begun to rear their ugly head. David turned to his lead engineer, Claire, who was overseeing the operation. "How are we doing on the new batch?" he asked, his voice low but urgent. Claire wiped sweat from her brow and looked at him with a mixture of determination and frustration. "We're pushing as hard as we can, but we're falling behind. The efficiency of the panels is great, but scaling this up to the level we need. It's going to take more than just tweaking the line. We need new suppliers, new strategies." David's mind raced. He had expected some challenges, but the reality of rapid scaling was proving harder than anticipated. Every new challenge felt like an opportunity to learn, but there was only so much time. The market was waiting for Tesla to deliver, and the pressure was mounting. "We need to find those new suppliers, Claire," David said, pacing back and forth. "We can't afford delays. Solar tech is already gaining traction, and the last thing we need is to fall behind again." Claire nodded, but there was a look of concern in her eyes. "I'll get on it. But we're going to need to take a good look at our logistics and distribution networks as well. It's not just about manufacturing. The entire supply chain is going to have to shift." Meanwhile, Elon was navigating a different set of pressures. Despite their progress with the solar panels, the financial markets had reacted negatively to Tesla's decision to halt production in certain regions due to ethical concerns. Tesla's stock price had taken a hit, and there was growing skepticism from analysts about whether Tesla's commitment to social responsibility would hurt its bottom line in the long term. David had known this day was coming. When they made the decision to prioritize ethics over speed, they knew it would cost them in the short term. But the longer they waited to prove that Tesla could be both profitable and responsible, the harder it became to silence the critics. "Elon, we need to talk," David said one morning, walking into Elon's office, his face tight with frustration. "The financial pressure is becoming unbearable. We're behind on our numbers, and the market isn't forgiving. We need to show them we can scale quickly." Elon looked up from his desk, his expression unreadable. "I know," he said after a moment, "but scaling too fast comes with its own risks. We can't sacrifice the integrity of our products just to appease Wall Street." David sat down across from him, the weight of their predicament pressing down on him. "I get that, but if we don't show growth soon, it could undermine everything we've worked for. The markets are fickle. They don't care about our values. They care about results." Elon leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled together as he considered David's words. "I don't care about Wall Street's approval. I care about the mission. If we lose sight of that, we lose everything." David nodded, but the truth was, he knew Elon was right. Tesla had always been driven by a higher purpose. The question was, could they convince the world to trust that mission, even when the numbers weren't in their favor? Over the next several weeks, David and Elon worked together to find a balance between their commitment to ethics and the need for financial performance. They worked with the PR team to craft a new narrative for the company, one that emphasized Tesla's long-term vision for sustainable energy rather than focusing on quarterly profits. At the same time, they pushed forward with new strategies to streamline manufacturing and distribution processes. Claire and her team worked relentlessly to optimize the production line, implementing new automation systems that would allow them to scale faster without sacrificing quality. They brought in new suppliers who could meet Tesla's stringent ethical and environmental standards, ensuring that every component of their new solar panels aligned with Tesla's mission. David knew the next few months would be make or break. The pressure to deliver was immense, but he believed in Tesla's ability to adapt. They had already overcome so many obstacles, and now it was time to prove they could do it again. One evening, David sat alone in his office, reviewing the latest reports on their progress. Despite all the challenges, there were signs of improvement. The production bottlenecks were starting to ease, and distribution channels were being ramped up. Tesla was making progress, even if it wasn't as fast as they'd hoped. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. His phone buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was a message from Claire. "Claire, we've hit another snag. The solar panel yield is not quite where we need it to be, and there are still inefficiencies in the solar cell assembly process. I think we need more time to fine-tune everything before scaling further. Otherwise, we risk losing quality control." David felt a wave of frustration. They had been so close, but at the same time, he knew Claire was right. If they scaled too fast and compromised on quality, it could set them back even further. It was another tough decision to make. After a long moment, David replied, "Take the time you need. Quality comes first. Let's get this right before we move forward." Days turned into weeks, and Tesla's residential solar program slowly began to show real traction. Despite the challenges, the team had made remarkable strides. With their new production lines in place, Tesla was starting to meet demand, albeit at a slower pace than initially projected. Yet, as more homes and businesses adopted Tesla's solar technology, there was a palpable sense of optimism in the air. People were beginning to see the benefits of solar energy, not just in terms of cost savings, but also in terms of environmental impact. David's efforts to scale Tesla's solar project responsibly had paid off. They were starting to gain market share, and consumer confidence was rising. But the road ahead would still be filled with challenges. Tesla's commitment to ethical sourcing, sustainability, and innovation would continue to set them apart from competitors, but it also meant that they could never afford to take shortcuts. One evening, as David sat in his office, reflecting on the journey, he received another message. This time, it was from Elon. "Elon, we've got something big coming up. Let's meet tomorrow morning. It's time for the next chapter." David's heart quickened. He had no idea what Elon was referring to, but he knew one thing for sure. Tesla was on the brink of something monumental. The morning air was crisp as David stepped into Tesla's headquarters, but there was no escaping the pressure that weighed on him. The solar panels had started to gain real traction in the market, but the rapid scaling of production was still not where it needed to be. While they had moved past some of the early bottlenecks, Tesla's new vision of bringing affordable solar energy to every household still seemed like a faraway dream. The competition was fierce, and solar tech wasn't sitting idly by. They were already working on improving their products, trying to pull ahead once again. David's phone buzzed, pulling him out of his thoughts. It was a message from Elon. Elon, I need to see you in my office. It's time to make a decision. David's stomach churned as he headed to Elon's office. He had no idea what the decision was, but knowing Elon, it was going to be something monumental. As he walked through the halls, he tried to calm his racing thoughts. Tesla had already been through so much to get to this point. The next move had to be just as calculated. Elon was already seated at his desk when David entered the room. His posture was calm, but his eyes were intense, like he had something important to say. David, I've been thinking, Elon began, gesturing for him to sit. We've done well with the solar panels, but we're not moving fast enough. The market is evolving quickly. The competition is catching up, and if we don't take a leap now, we risk losing the momentum. David leaned forward, trying to read Elon's expression. What are you suggesting? Elon stood up and walked over to the window. He gazed out over the Tesla campus, a thoughtful expression on his face. I've been in talks with some key players in the industry. We have an opportunity to acquire solar tech. They're the most direct threat to us, and acquiring them could solidify our position as the dominant force in the renewable energy space. David felt his pulse quicken. The idea of acquiring solar tech was bold, but it was also risky. He had always believed that Tesla's strength lay in its ability to innovate from the ground up, not by absorbing competitors. But then again, this could accelerate their progress in ways they hadn't imagined. Are we talking about a merger or a full acquisition? David asked, trying to process the magnitude of what Elon was proposing. A full acquisition, Elon said with certainty. We'd bring their technology, their team, and their market share under our roof. It would give us immediate access to a game-changing product line, and we'd eliminate one of our biggest competitors in the process. David rubbed his chin, weighing the pros and cons. The acquisition of solar tech would not only speed up Tesla's ability to dominate the solar market, but it would also eliminate a key rival. However, there were major risks involved. Tesla's culture was known for its innovation and agility, but absorbing an entire company could create internal friction and slow down their momentum. I'm not sure it's the right move, David said slowly. We've worked so hard to build something unique here at Tesla. We've always been about doing things our way, creating our own path. This feels like we'd be abandoning that for an easy shortcut. Elon turned to him, a faint smile on his lips. I've never been about shortcuts, but sometimes the right move is about taking calculated risks. Think about it. With solar tech, we wouldn't just be reacting to competition. We'd be leading the charge. We'd have the resources to make our solar product available to everyone, faster than we ever could on our own. David's mind was racing. On the one hand, this could be the key to accelerating their mission. But on the other, there was something unsettling about losing Tesla's independence. The company had always prided itself on being a disruptor, not a follower. You're asking me to change everything, David said, his voice quieter now, the weight of the decision sinking in. Are you sure this is the direction we want to go? Elon's gaze softened. I know it's a big shift, but you've always known that nothing worthwhile comes without risk. Sometimes, you have to take a leap of faith to achieve something bigger. David sat in silence for a long moment, reflecting on all that Tesla had been through. Their success had come from pushing the boundaries, from risking everything to make a better future. But was this the right risk? Could they maintain the heart of Tesla, the spirit of innovation, while absorbing a competitor? I'll need to think about it, David said at last. Elon nodded. Take your time. But know this, if we do this, we move fast. Solar tech could change everything for us. It could put us years ahead of where we are now. David walked out of Elon's office, the weight of the decision hanging heavily on him. He spent the rest of the day meeting with various department heads, trying to gauge their feelings about the potential acquisition. Some were excited by the opportunity, seeing it as a way to leap ahead in the market. Others were more cautious, worried that absorbing solar tech would mean compromising Tesla's innovative culture. That evening, David found himself in his office, staring out the window at the sprawling Tesla campus below. The decision felt like a crossroads. On one hand, this could be the breakthrough they needed to truly change the solar energy landscape. On the other, it was a step into the unknown, and David wasn't sure if the company was ready for the shift in culture that would inevitably follow. He thought about the many late nights spent working alongside his team, the long hours of research and development, and the relentless pursuit of their vision. Tesla had always been a company that was driven by a single idea, that technology could change the world for the better. But would they lose sight of that if they absorbed solar tech? Could they remain true to their roots? Just as he was about to send an email to Elon, expressing his concerns, his phone rang. It was Claire. "David," she said, her voice urgent, "we've got a problem. One of our suppliers has gone back on their agreement, and we're facing a serious delay in production. We need to make a decision, and we need to move fast." David's heart sank. It seemed like no matter what decision he made, whether it was the solar tech acquisition or scaling production at their own pace, there was always another obstacle waiting around the corner. But that was the nature of progress, wasn't it? Every breakthrough came with its own set of challenges. Taking a deep breath, David made a choice. It was time to move forward, one way or another. The days following his meeting with Elon felt like an endless stretch of tension for David. His mind was pulled in different directions, torn between the promise of a faster route to market and the core of what Tesla had always stood for. He had always been driven by the desire to innovate, to push boundaries, and do things others thought impossible. But what if the next step was one of compromise? Late one night, after countless meetings and discussions with the Tesla leadership team, David sat at his desk, weighing the pros and cons of Elon's offer. He stared at the draft email that had been sitting in his inbox for hours, wondering if he was truly making the right decision. Finally, he hit send. His decision was made. Tesla would acquire solar tech. It was a leap, but David believed it was the right move for the company. They could still innovate, still lead, but now they would have the resources to push the solar revolution further. They could focus on enhancing the technology, integrating solar tech's expertise with Tesla's vision for a sustainable future. It would propel them ahead of the competition and put Tesla's solar solutions in more homes and businesses faster than they ever could on their own. The next morning, David was met with a flurry of activity. His decision to acquire solar tech had set the wheels in motion. Elon was already on the phone with their lawyers, and the teams from both companies were preparing for the initial phases of the merger. It all felt so fast, too fast, but there was no going back now. David met with Claire and the other department heads later that afternoon to discuss the next steps. The tension in the room was palpable. Some were excited about the potential to expand, to take Tesla's solar ambitions to new heights, while others seemed wary. "We're moving faster than we ever have," Claire said, her voice a mix of excitement and concern. "But we need to make sure we integrate solar tech's technology without losing our identity. We can't afford to dilute what Tesla stands for." David nodded, understanding her concerns. "I know, and I share them. But we have a chance to bring together the best of both worlds. Solar tech's established market presence and our innovative spirit. We just need to ensure we do it carefully." Over the next few weeks, the merger began to unfold. Engineers from both Tesla and solar tech worked together to integrate their solar technologies. It wasn't without its challenges. Tesla's culture of fast-paced innovation sometimes clashed with solar tech's more traditional corporate approach. There were meetings where engineers and project managers from both companies butted heads over design philosophies, and the tension was evident. David watched from the sidelines, knowing this was part of the growing pains. Integrating two companies was never going to be easy, especially when they came from different worlds. But he had to admit, there were moments where the collaboration clicked. New ideas were coming to the table, new solutions to old problems. Solar tech's experience in large-scale production helped alleviate some of the bottlenecks Tesla had faced in scaling its solar panel output. But as the weeks went by, David noticed something unsettling. The merger's momentum was starting to stall. The culture clash between Tesla's agile innovation and solar tech's more structured approach wasn't the only issue. There were now internal politics, hidden rivalries, and a mounting sense of uncertainty among Tesla employees. David had been so focused on the long-term vision that he hadn't fully accounted for the potential friction in the short term. It was a wake-up call. One late evening, David was sitting in his office when he received a message from Claire. "Claire, we need to talk. There's something you should know." David's heart skipped a beat. "What now?" He quickly replied and headed to her office. When he arrived, Claire was waiting for him, a look of frustration on her face. It's the merger. We're seeing issues that we didn't anticipate. I mean, we knew there would be challenges, but it's worse than we thought. We're losing cohesion. Employees from SolarTech feel like they're being sidelined, and some of our Tesla teams are starting to question whether the acquisition was the right move. David frowned, feeling the weight of her words. I knew this wouldn't be easy, but I didn't realize it was this bad. Claire's expression softened, but there was a quiet urgency in her voice. The problem is, we're not communicating well enough. We've moved so fast that people are starting to feel disconnected. We have a divided culture now, and it's not just about innovation, it's about trust. Some people feel like we've sold out, and others are worried they'll lose their jobs as we merge the companies. David rubbed his temples, trying to process it all. This wasn't just a matter of scaling up. This was about maintaining Tesla's soul, its sense of purpose. What do we do? We need to bring everyone together, Claire said firmly. We need to reset. Maybe it's time for a company-wide meeting, a chance to get everyone on the same page. We need to remind people of the bigger picture, remind them why they're here. This merger should be a chance to bring the best out of both companies, not tear us apart. David knew Claire was right. He had been so focused on the technical side of things, on the vision of the product, that he had failed to fully address the human side of the equation. It was time for a reset. The next morning, David called for an all-hands meeting. It was time to address the team, to share the vision for the future, and to reignite the passion that had driven Tesla from the beginning. The room was packed, the air thick with anticipation and unspoken tension. David took the stage, standing before the team. He took a deep breath and began. I know the past few weeks have been challenging. The merger with SolarTech was never going to be easy. We've had to make some tough decisions, and not everyone agrees with them. But I'm here to tell you why we did this. He paused, making eye contact with different team members in the crowd. Tesla was founded on the idea that technology could change the world. We didn't start out to be just another car company. We started out to solve big problems. And our mission has always been about more than just profit. It's about impact. Our goal is to make sustainable energy available to everyone. And now, we have the opportunity to do that faster, more effectively, and at a larger scale than ever before. David could see the skepticism on some faces, but he pressed on. This merger with SolarTech wasn't about abandoning our core values. It's about enhancing them. We're not just creating products. We're creating a future where solar energy is accessible to all. And that starts with all of you. We need your creativity, your passion, your innovation. We need to come together, not just as employees of Tesla or SolarTech, but as a single, united team. The meeting ended with mixed reactions. Some employees seemed reassured, while others remained uncertain. It was clear that the road ahead would be a rocky one, but David was determined to make it work. He knew that Tesla's culture was strong enough to overcome this setback, but it would take time and effort. As David sat in his office later that day, reflecting on the meeting, he realized that this was just another chapter in Tesla's journey. Every company faced challenges. Every path had its obstacles. But it was how you handled those obstacles that determined your future. Tesla had always been a company that thrived on pushing forward, even in the face of adversity. And this was no different. They would push through the growing pains of the merger, rebuild trust, and come out stronger on the other side. The real question was, how far could they go before the stakes became too high to bear? The weeks after the all-hands meeting passed in a blur. Tesla's leadership team worked tirelessly to bridge the gap between the two cultures, focusing on communication, transparency, and unity. David spent most of his days in meetings with both Tesla and SolarTech teams, ensuring that everyone was on the same page, emphasizing that their shared mission was greater than any individual company. Slowly, things began to shift. The tension that had once hung over the offices like a thick fog started to dissipate. Employees from both sides began collaborating more seamlessly, exchanging ideas and working on joint projects. It wasn't perfect, there were still moments of friction, but it was clear that the merger, despite its rocky start, was starting to take shape. David couldn't help but feel a sense of pride as he watched his team come together. The work was hard, the stakes high, but the passion and commitment that had always defined Tesla were still alive. In fact, the merger had ignited a new fire in the company. Ideas that had once seemed impossible were now within reach. Elon, as usual, was pushing for more. David, we need to go further. We've got the scale now, but we need to accelerate. Let's get aggressive with solar expansion. Let's build the future. David smiled, appreciating Elon's relentless drive. But he knew that it wasn't just about speed anymore. The key was in balancing ambition with sustainability. Tesla had already been through so much to get to this point, and they had learned the hard way that sometimes the best way to win was by being patient, even when the world demanded immediate results. One evening, David stood on the rooftop of Tesla's new solar plant, looking out over the sprawling fields of solar panels that stretched as far as the eye could see. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden hue over the landscape. The plant was fully operational now, and the energy it generated was already being fed into the grid, powering homes and businesses across the region. It was a moment of quiet reflection. Just a few years ago, this had been nothing more than a dream, an ambitious idea that had been laughed at by some in the industry. Now, it was a reality. David thought back to everything Tesla had gone through. The struggles, the setbacks, the moments of doubt. They had faced overwhelming odds, but they had always pushed forward. And now, they were on the cusp of something even bigger. A future where clean, renewable energy was the norm, not the exception. The following week, Tesla made the official announcement about the successful merger with SolarTech. It was a momentous day. The press covered it extensively, and the world took notice. They weren't just a car company anymore. They were the pioneers of a clean energy revolution. But the announcement wasn't just about the merger. It was about the mission. Tesla wasn't just building electric cars or solar panels. They were creating a sustainable future. They were proving that it was possible to do well by doing good. And that was the message David wanted to send. The next few months were a whirlwind. Tesla expanded its reach, rolling out new solar products that were more affordable and efficient than anything the market had ever seen. The company's electric vehicles became more popular than ever, and the demand for their solar solutions grew exponentially. Tesla was becoming synonymous with clean energy, and the merger with SolarTech had positioned them at the forefront of that transformation. Despite the challenges, David was proud of the progress they had made. Tesla was no longer just a disruptor, it was a leader. The industry was watching, and Tesla's competitors were scrambling to catch up. And then, there was the announcement that David had been hoping for, but still couldn't quite believe. Tesla's solar products were now being used in homes across the world, with partnerships in multiple countries. They were on track to meet their goal of providing affordable, sustainable energy to millions of people. One afternoon, David sat down with Elon, Claire, and the rest of the leadership team for a final meeting about the next phase of Tesla's journey. The team was optimistic, excited about what they had accomplished, but David could sense that the real work was just beginning. Elon, David said, we've come so far, but there's still so much to do. We've built something incredible, but we have to keep pushing forward. The solar revolution is just getting started. We need to be relentless in our pursuit of innovation. Elon leaned back in his chair, a satisfied grin on his face. That's the spirit, David. We're not done yet. Not by a long shot, but I think we're heading in the right direction. David smiled, feeling a sense of peace settle over him. The challenges they had faced had tested their resolve, but in the end, they had come together as a team. Tesla was more than just a company. It was a movement, a force that could change the world. And now, more than ever, they had the resources and the vision to make it happen. As the meeting wrapped up, David couldn't help but think back to the moment when he first joined Tesla, unsure of where the journey would take him. He had taken a risk, just like everyone else at Tesla, but that risk had paid off. Together, they had created something greater than they ever imagined. David stood up, looking out over the Tesla campus, a sense of pride swelling within him. The road ahead was still uncertain. There would always be more obstacles, more challenges. But for the first time in a long while, he felt confident in their ability to navigate whatever came next. Tesla had started with a vision, and now they were building the future. A future where sustainability wasn't just a dream. It was a reality, and it was only the beginning. Thank you for following David and Tesla's journey. The road ahead is long, but with innovation and purpose, the future is bright. If you like any further additions or adjustments, feel free to let me know. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?